Hello and thank you for joining for tonight's dark and scary stories. In the comments, let us know where you are listening from and if there are cryptids you would like me to make some stories on. Now for tonight's dark and scary stories, I hope you all enjoy. The Dark Below, a horror novel. Chapter 1, The Diver. They pulled Marcus Chen from Wallowa Lake at 6:47 a.m., his body convulsing, his lungs full of water that shouldn't have been there. He'd been underwater for 11 minutes, 11 minutes that should have killed him, that would have killed any normal diver, but he was alive. Barely. Screaming. The teeth, he shrieked as the paramedics tried to restrain him. The teeth, they're everywhere. His wetsuit was shredded, the neoprene torn in patterns that suggested claws, talons, something with fingers that could grip and tear. His ribs were crushed, pressed inward by forces that should have required industrial machinery, not organic appendages. And his face was frozen in an expression of terror so profound it had distorted his features, turned his eyes into white-rimmed holes, stretched his mouth into a rictus of absolute horror. Dr. Sarah Williams was the attending physician at Wallowa Lake General Hospital, a small facility that served the summer tourists and the year-round residents of this remote corner of Oregon. She'd seen drowning victims before. She'd seen trauma, accidents, deaths that defied easy explanation. But she'd never seen anything like Marcus Chen. "Get him stabilized," she ordered, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "I want X-rays, CT scans, full workup, and someone get me his dive partner. I want to know what the hell happened down there." The dive partner was a local man named Joe Redhawk, a Nez Perce who worked as a fishing guide and occasional recovery diver. He sat in the waiting room, wrapped in a blanket, shaking, his eyes fixed on some middle distance that only he could see. "Mr. Redhawk," Sarah said, sitting beside him, "I'm Dr. Williams. I need you to tell me what happened." Joe didn't look at her. He went down to recover a body, missing hiker, went in 3 days ago, never came out. And he found it, the body, but Joe's voice dropped to a whisper, but something else found him. "What do you mean?" "I was on the boat, monitoring his feed. He reached the body, started to ascend, and then—" Joe finally turned to look at her, and Sarah saw something in his eyes that made her skin crawl. Something grabbed him, something massive. The camera showed. It showed teeth, rows of teeth, and eyes, so many eyes. Eyes. In the dark, in the deep, watching him, Joe shuddered. "I pulled the line, hauled him up as fast as I could, but he was already changed, already screaming, already broken." Sarah thought of Marcus's injuries, the crushed ribs, the shredded wetsuit, the terror on his face. "What did this?" she asked. "A fish, a bear?" Joe laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Not a fish, not a bear, something older, something that was here before us." He leaned close, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Alia, the devourer, the thing that sleeps in the deep." "I don't understand." "You will." Joe stood, dropping the blanket. "When it comes for you, when it learns your name, when it calls you into the dark." He walked away, not looking back, leaving Sarah alone with questions she couldn't answer and a fear she couldn't name. She returned to the examination room, to Marcus Chen's body, still alive, technically, but empty, hollow, his mind shattered by whatever he'd seen in the depths. The X-rays showed the crushed ribs, the internal bleeding, the damage that should have killed him. But they also showed something else. In his lungs, in the fluid they'd pumped out during resuscitation, not just water. Saliva, digestive enzymes, traces of organic material that didn't match any known species. And in his stomach, something that made Sarah's blood run cold. A finger, human finger, partially digested, the nail still attached, the skin still recognizable. Not Marcus's finger, someone else's. The missing hiker, perhaps, or someone else, someone who'd gone into the water and never come out. Sarah called the sheriff, called the state police, called everyone she could think of who might understand, who might help, who might explain. But as she waited for responses, she kept thinking of Joe Redhawk's words. The devourer, the thing that sleeps in the deep, the creature that had been here before humanity, that watched and waited and learned. And she thought of the lake, beautiful, serene Wallowa Lake, surrounded by mountains, fed by glaciers, deeper than anyone had ever measured. The locals called it the jewel of the Wallowas, a pristine wilderness that drew tourists from around the world. But what if it was something else? What if the beauty was a mask, a disguise, a lure? What if the lake was alive, aware, hungry? She looked out the window, at the water glittering in the morning sun, and for the first time in her life she felt afraid of nature, afraid of the wild, afraid of the dark. Because something was down there, something that had crushed a man's ribs, shredded his wetsuit, filled his lungs with saliva and his stomach with human flesh. Something that was still there, still watching, still waiting. And Sarah knew, with a certainty that went beyond logic, that it would kill again. Chapter 2: The Arrival. The college friends arrived on a Friday, the start of summer break, the beginning of what should have been the best vacation of their lives. Ethan Marsh was the organizer, 22 years old, pre-law at Stanford, ambitious and arrogant, and convinced that the world operated according to rules he could learn and master. He'd rented the cabin, planned the itinerary, convinced his friends that a week in the Oregon wilderness would be the perfect escape from the pressures of school and the city. Mara Redhawk was the local connection, 21, studying environmental science at Oregon State, descendant of the Nez Perce tribe that had called this land home for millennia. She'd grown up hearing stories about Wallowa Lake, about the spirits that guarded it, about the price of disrespect. She didn't believe the stories, not really, but she respected them, feared them a little. Derek Liu was the skeptic, 22, computer science major, rationalist, atheist, believer in nothing that couldn't be proven by peer-reviewed research. He'd come for the hiking, the photography, the chance to debunk whatever supernatural nonsense Ethan and Mara might try to sell him. Jesse Carter was the wild card, 23, taking a year off from college to find himself, which mostly meant partying, taking risks, and documenting everything for his social media followers. He had the most followers, the most expensive camera equipment, and the least sense of self-preservation. They met in Portland, loaded their gear into Ethan's SUV, and drove east into the mountains. The journey took 6 hours, the landscape shifting from urban sprawl to farmland to forest to the dramatic peaks of the Wallowas. "This is it," Mara said as they crested the final ridge and the lake came into view. Wallowa Lake, the jewel of the wilderness. It was beautiful. There was no denying that. The water was a color that seemed impossible, turquoise near the shore, shifting to deep blue, then black as the bottom dropped away. Mountains rose on all sides, snow-capped even in June, their reflections perfect in the still water. "Wow," Jesse said, already filming. "This is going to get so many likes." "Put the camera down," Derek said. "Enjoy the moment." "I am enjoying the moment. I'm just also documenting it." Jesse panned across the vista, capturing the lake, the mountains, his friends' faces. "This is content gold." Ethan pulled into the cabin's driveway, a secluded rental on the eastern shore, away from the main tourist areas, surrounded by forest and silence. The cabin was rustic but comfortable, 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, a deck overlooking the water. "Home sweet home," Ethan announced, unloading bags. 1 week of freedom. No parents, no professors, no responsibilities. "Just nature," Mara added, "and each other." They settled in, exploring the cabin, claiming bedrooms, unpacking their gear. As evening approached, they gathered on the deck drinking beer, watching the sun set behind the mountains, painting the lake in shades of gold and crimson. "So," Jesse said, his voice carrying that particular tone of someone about to suggest something unwise, "who's up for a night swim?" "It's freezing," Derek said. The water's fed by glaciers. That's why you swim at night. The air's warm, the water feels good by comparison. Jesse grinned. Come on, live a little. I don't know, Mara said. The lake, there are stories. Oh, here we go. Derek rolled his eyes. The mystical native wisdom. Let me guess, the lake is sacred, the spirits are angry, we shouldn't disturb the water. Something like that. It's just stories, Ethan said. Legends. There's nothing in that water except fish and cold. And maybe bodies, Jesse added. Did you hear about the diver, the one they pulled out yesterday? They hadn't. They'd been driving out of cell range, isolated from news. What happened? Mara asked, her voice tight. Some guy went down to recover a missing hiker. Something attacked him, crushed his ribs, shredded his gear. He's in the hospital, totally out of it. Keeps screaming about teeth. Teeth? Derek laughed. Probably a fish, a big sturgeon or something. Sturgeon don't crush ribs, and they don't have teeth like that. Jesse's eyes gleamed with morbid excitement. Something else got him, something big. Or he panicked, Ethan said. Got tangled in his own line, freaked out, imagined things. Maybe, Jesse shrugged. Or maybe there's something in the lake, something that doesn't show up on tourist brochures. They sat in silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. The lake grew dark, the surface becoming a mirror that reflected the stars and nothing else. The forest was silent, the night sounds of crickets and owls conspicuously absent. Okay, Jesse said, standing. I'm doing it, night swim, who's with me? You're insane, Derek said. I'm adventurous, there's a difference. Jesse stripped off his shirt, kicked off his shoes. Last one in is a cowardly loser. He ran down to the shore, the gravel crunching under his feet, and splashed into the water without hesitation. The sound of his entry echoed across the lake, too loud, too sharp, like a violation of some ancient silence. This is a bad idea, Mara whispered. It's just Jesse being Jesse, Ethan said. He'll be back in 2 minutes, freezing and complaining. But Jesse didn't come back, not in 2 minutes, not in 5. Jesse, Ethan called, you okay? No answer. The lake was still, the surface unbroken, the darkness absolute. Jesse, Derek shouted, standing up, quit messing around. Still nothing. Ethan grabbed a flashlight from the cabin, shone it across the water. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing. Empty water, empty shore, no Jesse. Where is he? Mara's voice was shaking. Maybe he swam around the point, Derek suggested, trying to scare us. Jesse, Ethan screamed. This isn't funny, come back. The lake answered with silence. They waited 10 minutes, 15. The water remained undisturbed, the night remained silent, and Jesse remained gone. We should call someone, Myra said. No service, Derek reported, checking his phone. We're in a dead zone. Then we look for him. Ethan was already moving, grabbing a jacket, a flashlight. He can't have gone far. They searched the shoreline, calling Jesse's name, their voices echoing across the water. They found his clothes on the beach, his phone, his wallet, but no Jesse. Maybe he went back to the cabin, Derek said. Maybe he snuck around while we weren't looking. They returned to the cabin, hopeful, desperate, but Jesse wasn't there. His bag was untouched, his bed was empty, his camera was still on the deck where he'd left it. He's in the water, Myra said, her voice hollow. Something's happened to him, something's taken him. Taken him? Derek laughed, but the sound was forced, nervous. By what? A lake monster. Maybe. Mara, that's insane. Is it? She turned to face him, her eyes wide in the darkness. You heard what Jesse said, about the diver, about the teeth. That was an accident, panic, imagination. Then where is Jesse? Derek had no answer. They spent the night on the deck, watching the water, waiting for Jesse to emerge, to laugh, to reveal that it had all been a prank. But he didn't. The lake remained still, silent, empty. At dawn, they found the body. It washed up on the shore 50 yards from the cabin, deposited by the night's gentle currents. Jesse's body, or what remained of it. His torso was hollowed. The skin was intact, but beneath it the cavity was empty. No organs, no bones, just a shell, a husk, something that had been cleaned out with surgical precision. His face was frozen in an expression of ecstasy, not terror, not pain, joy. Whatever had happened to him in his final moments, he had wanted it. Mara screamed. Derek vomited. Ethan stood frozen, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were seeing. "We need to call the police," he finally managed. "The sheriff, someone." "There's no service," Derek gasped, wiping his mouth. "We need to drive, get to town, get help." "We can't leave him," Mara said. "We can't just leave him here. We have to, we can't carry him, we can't." Derek trailed off, staring at the body. Oh God, what did this?" They covered Jesse with a blanket, weighted the edges with rocks, and drove to the nearest town. They found the sheriff, a weary man named Tom Bradley who'd seen too much in his 30 years of service and had learned to expect worse. He listened to their story, his face growing paler with each detail. When they mentioned the lake, the night swim, the hollowed body, he made a sign, not the cross but something older, something that predated Christianity in these parts. "Alia," he whispered, "it's awake." "What?" Ethan asked. "The devourer, the guardian spirit, it's awake and it's feeding." The sheriff stood, moving to the window, looking out at the lake that glimmered in the morning sun. "I need to call the tribal council, the elders, they need to know." "The tribal council," Derek's voice was incredulous. "We need the FBI, the state police, someone who can actually investigate this." "Investigate what?" The sheriff turned to face them. "A monster, a spirit, something that lives in the deep and feeds on the unwary. Who do you think is going to believe that?" "But I'll send someone to recover the body, and I'll file a report, drowning probably, accidental death. That's what the official record will say." The sheriff's voice was hard, final. "But you three, you need to leave. Today, pack your things, get in your car and drive away. Don't look back, don't come back." "We can't just," Mara started. "You can and you will." The sheriff leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Listen to me. I've lived here my whole life. I've heard the stories, the warnings, the legends. I never believed them, not really, but I've seen things I can't explain. People who went into that water and never came out. Bodies that washed up. Wrong, changed." "Changed how?" "Like your friend, hollowed, empty, fed upon." The sheriff sat back, suddenly looking very old. "It happens every 30 years or so, like clockwork. The lake gets hungry and it feeds. Then it sleeps again. We've learned to live with it, to respect it, to stay away from the water when the signs appear." "What signs?" "The algae, the way the water smells, the silence when the animals go quiet, when the birds stop singing." The sheriff stood. "Your friend ignored the signs, went into the water at night when it's strongest. He paid the price. Don't make the same mistake." They left the sheriff's office in silence, each processing the impossibility of what they'd been told. A monster, a spirit, something that fed on humans in cycles that spanned generations. "He's crazy," Derek said as they walked to the car. "Or covering something up. A serial killer, maybe. Someone who uses the lake to dispose of bodies." "Then how do you explain the hollowed torso?" Mara asked. "The surgical precision, the feeding." "I don't know, but I know it's not a monster." "How do you know?" "Because monsters aren't real." They drove back to the cabin in silence. The sheriff's men had already come and gone, Jesse's body removed, the scene cleaned. The blanket was gone, the rocks were scattered, the shore was empty. But something remained, something that made Mara's skin crawl as she walked down to the water's edge. Claw marks, deep gouges in the wooden pylons of the dock, spaced wide apart, each mark the size of a human hand. "Look at this," she called. Ethan and Derek joined her, staring at the marks. A bear, Derek suggested. Bears don't climb docks and they don't leave marks like this. Mara touched one of the gouges, feeling the depth, the precision. These are fingers. Something with fingers climbed out of the water. Something that wanted to pull itself up, to reach us. You're imagining things, Derek said, but he didn't sound convinced. Am I? Mara pointed to the water. Look. They looked. The surface was still, mirror calm, reflecting the mountains and the sky. But as they watched, something moved beneath. Something massive, serpentine, gliding through the depths with a grace that suggested intelligence, purpose, awareness. It surfaced briefly, just the top of its head, just the suggestion of eyes, golden, ancient, watching. Then it dove, leaving only ripples that spread across the water like fingerprints. Did you see that? Ethan whispered. I saw it, Mara said. I saw it too, Derek admitted, his voice hollow, but I don't know what I saw. I do. Mara turned away from the water, her face pale. My grandfather told me stories about W. Alia, the devourer. He said it was a guardian spirit once, a protector of the lake, but it was betrayed long ago and turned vengeful. Now it feeds on those who disturb the water, those who forget the old ways. That's just a story, Derek said. Is it? Jesse is dead. Something killed him, something that lives in that lake. Mara pointed at the water. We need to leave, now, before it decides we're worth feeding on too. We can't leave, Ethan said. Not yet, Jesse's family. They need to know what happened. The police need to investigate. We need to. We need to survive, Mara interrupted. That's all that matters now, surviving, getting away from this place. They argued. Ethan wanted to stay, to understand, to find answers. Derek wanted to call in authorities, to bring in experts, to treat this like a crime scene. Only Mara wanted to run, to flee, to put as much distance as possible between themselves and the lake. In the end, they compromised. They would stay one more night, pack their things, leave in the morning. One night with the cabin locked, the doors barred, the lights on. One night with the lake watching. They didn't sleep. They sat in the living room, the lights blazing, the windows covered, listening to the silence. The lake was quiet, the forest was quiet, even the wind was still. At 3:33 a.m. the knocking started. It came from below, from beneath the cabin, a rhythmic tapping like knuckles against wood, like something asking to be let in. What is that? Derek whispered. The dock, Mara said. Something's under the dock. They crept to the window, peered through the blinds. The moon was full, casting silver light across the water, illuminating the dock in shades of gray and black. And beneath the dock, something moved. Pale, massive, serpentine. It coiled around the pylons, its body visible in the moonlight, scales catching the light and reflecting it in patterns that suggested words, symbols, meaning. It was looking at them. The head rose from the water, the eyes, those golden, ancient eyes, fixed on the window, on them, on their fear. Don't move, Mara breathed. Don't breathe, don't let it know we see it. But it already knew, it always knew. The creature opened its mouth, revealing rows of teeth, concentric circles of them, a maw that could swallow a human whole. And from that maw came a sound, not a roar, not a hiss, a song. Low, beautiful, terrible, a melody that bypassed the ears and spoke directly to the brain, the heart, the soul. It was a song of welcome, of invitation, of belonging. Ethan felt his hand reach for the window latch, felt his body move toward the door, felt the overwhelming urge to walk down to the water, to enter the lake, to join the song. No, Mara gasped, grabbing his arm. Fight it, don't listen. I have to, Ethan whispered. I have to go. Derek, help me. Derek was already at the door, his hand on the knob, his face slack with longing. It's calling, he said. Can't you hear? It's calling us home. Derek, no. But he was gone, out the door, running down the path to the shore. Ethan broke free of Mara's grip, followed him, both of them moving with that terrible, inevitable grace of sleepwalkers, of the possessed, of the called. Mara screamed their names, screamed for help, screamed against the song that was trying to claim her too. She grabbed a knife from the kitchen, pressed the blade against her palm until blood flowed, using the pain to anchor herself in reality. She ran after them, the knife in her hand, her palm bleeding, her mind screaming. She reached the shore in time to see Derek enter the water. He walked in calmly, peacefully, a smile on his face, the song still echoing from his lips. The creature waited for him, its mouth open, its eyes gleaming. It swallowed him whole. One gulp, one moment, and Derek was gone. Ethan was next. He was waist deep in the water, still walking, still smiling, still singing. "Ethan," Mara screamed, "fight it, please." He turned, looked at her, and for a moment clarity returned to his eyes, fear, recognition, desperation. "Mara," he whispered, "help me." She ran into the water, the cold shocking her system, breaking the song's hold on her mind. She grabbed Ethan's hand, pulled him back, felt the strength of the compulsion fighting against her. "Come on," she screamed, "fight, fight." The creature moved. Its tail whipped across the surface, creating a wave that knocked them both down. Mara lost her grip on Ethan, felt him being pulled away, dragged toward the waiting mouth. She lunged, grabbed his ankle, held on with desperate strength. The creature pulled, she pulled, Ethan suspended between them, screaming, crying, begging. Then the knife. She still had the knife. She stabbed at the water, at the pale form that held Ethan, felt the blade connect with something solid, something that shrieked and released its grip. Ethan flew backward, landing on the shore, gasping. Mara scrambled after him, pulling him away from the water, away from the creature, away from the song that was still trying to call them back. The creature screamed, a sound like tearing metal, like dying children, like the end of the world. It thrashed, its massive body creating waves that crashed against the shore, that threatened to pull them back in. They ran. Up the path to the cabin inside, locking the door, barricading it with furniture, turning on every light, every radio, every source of noise that might drown out the song. The creature screamed for an hour, then the silence returned. They huddled together in the living room, shaking, crying, holding each other like children afraid of the dark. "Derek," Ethan whispered, "Jesse, they're gone." "I know. What do we do?" Mara looked at him, her eyes hard, determined. "We survive, we leave, and we never come back." But even as she spoke, she knew it wasn't over. The creature was still out there, still watching, still waiting. And it had learned their names. Chapter 3: The Old Stories. They didn't leave. Not immediately. The creature had damaged Ethan's leg in the struggle, a deep gash that needed stitches, antibiotics, professional care. And they couldn't drive, not in their state, not through the mountain roads at night. So they stayed, barricaded in the cabin, waiting for dawn, waiting for help, waiting for the courage to face the water again. Mara called her grandfather, Joseph Redhawk, not the guide who'd been with Marcus Chen, but an elder, a keeper of stories, a man who had lived his whole life in the shadow of the lake and knew its secrets. "W. Alia," he said when she told him what had happened. "The devourer, it has awakened." "Grandfather, what is it, really?" A pause on the line. Then, "It is old, granddaughter, older than the mountains, older than the rivers. It was here when the first humans came, when our ancestors crossed the land bridge and found this valley." "But what is it, an animal, a spirit?" "It is both, and neither." Joseph's voice was distant, remembering. In the old stories it was a guardian, a spirit of the water that protected the lake, kept it pure, kept it safe. Our ancestors made offerings to it, fish, game, sometimes people. Those who volunteered to join with the guardian to become part of its power. Human sacrifice. Not sacrifice. Union. The chosen ones would enter the water and never return. But they weren't killed, granddaughter. They were transformed, became part of Alia, part of its consciousness, its memory. That's insane. Is it? Joseph's voice was gentle. Think of it. To live forever in the deep. To see the world change, to watch civilizations rise and fall, to be part of something greater than one short human life. But it kills people now. It doesn't transform them, it eats them. Yes, Joseph's voice hardened, because we stopped the offerings. We forgot the old ways. We treated the lake as a resource, a playground, a thing to be used, and Alia grew angry, hungry, vengeful. So it's punishing us. It is feeding, surviving, the only way it knows how. Joseph paused. There is a way to stop it, to send it back to sleep, but it is dangerous and it requires sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice? Blood willingly given, a life offered to the lake, not taken but given. Mara thought of Jesse, of Derek, of the way they'd walked into the water, smiling. The song, she said slowly, it makes people want to go, to give themselves. Yes, the song is its lure, its invitation. Those who hear it and choose to answer, they become part of Alia. They feed it, sustain it, become part of its memory. But we didn't choose, we fought, we ran. Then you are marked. Joseph's voice was grave. Alia knows you now, knows your names, your faces, your fear. It will hunt you, it will call you, until you answer or until you find a way to stop it. How do we stop it? There is a place, a narrow in the lake where the water is shallow, where the current is strong. In the old stories it was called the gate, the place where Alia entered this world. If you can trap it there at dawn when the sun strikes the water, you can hurt it, maybe kill it. Trap it how? Fire. The old stories say Alia fears fire. The sun is fire and it burns. If you can bring fire to the water, trap the creature in the narrows, you can drive it back. Send it to the deep. Fire, Mara repeated. We can do that, gasoline maybe, or not just any fire, sacred fire, fire that has been blessed, fire that carries intention. Grandfather, we're not priests, we don't know how to bless fire. Then learn, Joseph's voice was final, or die. Those are your choices, granddaughter. Fight with what you have or surrender to the deep. He hung up, leaving Mara alone with her thoughts, her fear, her impossible task. She returned to the living room where Ethan sat on the couch, his leg bandaged, his face pale. He looked up as she entered, his eyes red-rimmed, haunted. What did he say? Mara told him. The stories, the history, the way to stop the creature. The need for fire, for sacrifice, for a confrontation at dawn. It's insane, Ethan said when she finished. We're not warriors, we're not heroes, we're college students. We're survivors, Mara corrected. And we have to do this, not just for us, for everyone who comes after. If we don't stop it, it will keep feeding, keep killing, keep growing stronger. And if we fail, then we join Jesse and Derek. Mara's voice was flat. We become part of Alia, part of its memory. They sat in silence, the weight of their situation pressing down upon them. Two people, injured and terrified, facing a creature that had existed for millennia, that had killed countless others, that was waiting just outside in the water in the dark. We need supplies, Ethan said finally. Gasoline, matches, something to bless the fire, whatever that means. My grandfather said intention matters, belief. If we believe the fire is sacred, if we treat it as a weapon against the creature, maybe that's enough. Maybe. Ethan stood, testing his injured leg. It held barely. There's a general store in town. They'll have what we need. We can't go out there. It's still out there. It's always out there. We can't hide forever. Ethan moved to the window, peered through the blinds. The sun was rising, the lake glittering in the morning light, beautiful and serene. It sleeps during the day, or rests, or whatever it does. We have until nightfall. Mara joined him at the window. The lake looked peaceful, innocent, the kind of place where you might want to swim, to boat, to relax. But she knew what lurked beneath. She knew the eyes that watched from the deep. "Okay," she said. "We go to town, we get supplies, and we prepare for tonight." They drove to the general store, a rustic building that sold everything from fishing gear to groceries to religious supplies. The owner was an elderly woman named Mrs. Patterson, who'd lived in the valley for 60 years and knew every story, every legend, every secret. She looked at them, at their pale faces, their haunted eyes, the bandage on Ethan's leg, and she knew. "You've seen it," she said, "not a question." "We need supplies," Mara said. "Gasoline, containers, matches." "And sage," Mrs. Patterson added, "for blessing, for protection." "You know about it." "I know enough." The old woman moved behind the counter, gathering supplies. "My grandmother saw it once. 1956, it took her brother. She never spoke of it, but I knew. The way she looked at the water, the way she feared the night. She placed the supplies on the counter, 2 5-gallon gas cans, boxes of matches, bundles of dried sage. "You're going to fight it." "We have to." "Then take this too." She produced a necklace, a leather cord with a pendant made of obsidian, carved in the shape of an eye. "Protection. From the old ways. It won't stop Alia, but it might confuse it, make it harder for the creature to find you." Mara took the necklace, felt the weight of it, the history. "Thank you." "Don't thank me, just survive." Mrs. Patterson rang up the purchases, waved away the money Ethan offered. "On the house, for the fight ahead." They returned to the cabin with their supplies, their weapons, their desperate hope. The day passed in preparation, filling the gas cans, preparing the sage, planning their strategy. The Narrows, that was the key. A section of the lake where the shorelines converged, creating a channel only 50 feet wide. The water was shallow there, the current strong, the escape routes limited. If they could lure Alia into the Narrows, trap it there with fire. "How do we lure it?" Ethan asked. "Blood," Mara said. "The creature is drawn to blood, to injury, to weakness. So one of us has to be bait." "Yes," Mara looked at him. "I'll do it, I'm faster, I know the terrain." "Your leg is fine, mine." Ethan gestured to his bandaged thigh. "I'm slower, I'm weaker, I'm better bait." "Ethan, no." "Yes." He met her eyes, his expression determined. "Mara, I've been thinking about this. About Jesse, Derek, what happened to them. They didn't deserve to die. They were my friends, my responsibility. I brought them here. I organized this trip. Their blood is on my hands." "It's not your fault." "Isn't it?" Ethan laughed, a bitter sound. "I was so sure, so confident. Nothing bad could happen, not to us, not on our vacation. I was arrogant, and they died for it." "Ethan." "Let me do this. Let me be useful. Let me try to make it right." He took her hand. "You have the gasoline, you have the matches. When I lead it into the Narrows, you light the fire, you trap it, you kill it. And you?" "I'll run, I'll swim. I'll do whatever I can to survive, but if I don't," he squeezed her hand, "make sure it counts, make sure the creature dies." Mara wanted to argue, to insist, to find another way. But she knew he was right. He was injured, slower, more vulnerable, and he was determined. "Okay," she whispered, "but you survive, you hear me, you survive." "I'll try." They spent the rest of the day preparing, resting, gathering their strength for the night ahead. As the sun began to set, they moved to the Narrows, carrying their supplies, their weapons, their fear. The Narrows were exactly as described, a channel between converging shorelines, the water shallow and fast. On either side, rocky outcroppings provided vantage points, places to hide, places to wait. Mara positioned herself on the eastern shore, the gasoline cans beside her, the matches in her hand. Ethan took the western shore, his injured leg making him limp, making him vulnerable, making him perfect bait. "At 3:33, Mara said. "That's when it's strongest, when it hunts, be ready." "I will." "And Ethan." Yeah. Remember the diner, the one in Portland, where we had breakfast before we left. He smiled confused. What? Just remember if something happens, if I don't make it, remember the diner. Myra, what are you talking about? Just remember. She turned away, hiding her tears. Good luck. They waited. The sun set, the stars emerged, the moon rose full and bright over the lake. The water was still, silent, waiting. At 3:33 a.m. the song began. It came from the deep, from the center of the lake, a low vibration that grew into melody, into invitation, into compulsion. Mara felt it pulling at her, calling her, but she resisted, pressing the obsidian pendant against her chest, using the pain to anchor herself. Ethan felt it too. She could see him across the narrows, swaying, struggling, fighting the urge to walk into the water. Ethan, she screamed, remember why we're here. He shook his head, cleared his eyes, raised his hand in acknowledgement. He was still with her, still fighting. The water rippled. Something massive moved beneath the surface, approaching the narrows, approaching the bait. Come on, Ethan whispered. Come and get me. Alia emerged. It was larger than Mara remembered, or perhaps it was simply closer, more real, more terrifying. Its head rose from the water, the golden eyes scanning the shore, finding Ethan, fixing on him with terrible focus. It sang louder, the song becoming irresistible, a promise of belonging, of peace, of an end to fear and pain. No, Ethan gasped, backing away. No, I won't. He turned and ran, limping, stumbling toward the narrows. The creature followed, its massive body gliding through the water with impossible speed, its jaws opening, its teeth gleaming. Now, Ethan screamed, Mara, now. She moved, grabbing the gasoline cans, throwing them into the narrows, into the water where the creature pursued Ethan. The cans splashed, floated, bobbing on the surface. Alia paused, confused, its attention shifting from the bait to the disturbance. Mara struck the match, blessed it with intention, with belief, with desperate hope. Burn, she whispered. Burn, damn you. She threw the match. It hit the gasoline, and the world exploded. Fire erupted across the surface of the narrows, a wall of flame that rose 10 feet into the air, that illuminated the night like a second sun. The creature screamed, a sound like tearing metal, like dying children, like the end of the world. It thrashed, caught in the flames, its scales burning, its flesh charring. The fire consumed the gasoline, spread to the creature, turned the narrows into an inferno. Ethan, Mara screamed, run. She saw him on the far side of the narrows, beyond the flames. He was running, limping, making for the shore. The creature was between them, burning, screaming, thrashing. Go, Ethan shouted. Get out of here. Not without you. Go, he was at the shore now, climbing the rocks, pulling himself up. I'll meet you at the cabin. Go. Mara ran. She didn't want to leave him, didn't want to abandon him, but the fire was spreading. The creature was thrashing, and she knew that if she stayed, she would die. She reached the tree line, turned back for one last look. The creature was sinking, its burns too severe, its strength fading. It screamed one last time, a sound of rage and pain and terrible loneliness. Then it dove, disappearing into the deep, leaving only burning water and the smell of charred flesh. Ethan was gone too. She couldn't see him, couldn't find him in the darkness and the smoke. Ethan, she screamed, Ethan. No answer, just the crackle of flames, the lap of water, the silence of the forest. She waited, 10 minutes, 20. The fire died down, the gasoline consumed, the narrows returning to darkness. No Ethan. She searched the shore, calling his name, finding nothing. No body, no blood, no sign of what had happened. He had been there, she'd seen him climb the rocks, seen him reach the shore. But now he was gone. No, she whispered, no. She found his shoe on the rocks, one shoe discarded, empty, and beside it claw marks, deep gouges in the stone, fresh, wet. The creature had taken him. Despite the fire, despite the pain, it had reached up from the water and pulled him back, taken him, consumed him. Mara fell to her knees, screaming, crying, her grief echoing across the lake. She had failed. They had failed. The creature was wounded, maybe dying, but it had taken Ethan, taken him to the deep, made him part of its memory. She didn't know how long she stayed there, mourning, despairing. Eventually, the sun rose, the light returning to the world, and she forced herself to stand, to move, to survive. The creature was gone, the lake was calm, the forest was silent. But Mara knew it wasn't over. Alia was still alive, still hungry, still waiting. It would heal, recover, return. And she would be waiting. She walked back to the cabin, packed her things, drove away from the lake. She didn't look back, couldn't look back. But in her rearview mirror, she saw the water ripple, saw something massive move beneath the surface, saw the golden eyes watching her go. The battle was won, but the war had just begun. Chapter 4: The Haunting. Mara didn't go home. She couldn't face her family, her friends, her old life. Not after what she'd seen, what she'd done, what she'd lost. She drove south, aimlessly, putting miles between herself and the lake, between herself and the memory of golden eyes and burning flesh. She stopped in small towns, paid cash for motel rooms, slept with the lights on, woke screaming from dreams of drowning, of being hollowed, of becoming part of something vast and ancient and hungry. She tried to forget, tried to convince herself that it was over, that the creature was dead, that she was safe. But she knew better. It started with the sounds. A knocking late at night, coming from beneath whatever floor she happened to be sleeping on. Rhythmic, deliberate, like knuckles against wood, like something asking to be let in. Then the dreams. Every night the same dream. She was underwater in the deep, surrounded by darkness. And in that darkness she saw them. Jesse, Derek, Ethan, floating, suspended, their eyes open, their mouths moving, trying to speak. "Join us," they whispered. "Join us in the deep." She woke gasping, her lungs burning, her heart pounding. Sometimes she found water on her pillow, her sheets, her skin. Salt water, lake water, water that shouldn't be there. She knew what was happening. The creature was calling to her, reaching out across the miles, using its connection to those it had consumed, trying to draw her back. She resisted, fought, tried to build walls around her mind, her heart, her soul. But the call grew stronger. After 3 weeks, she couldn't take it anymore. She drove back to Wallowa Lake, back to the cabin, back to the place where everything had gone wrong. She needed to know, needed to see, needed to face the creature and end this, one way or another. The cabin was empty, abandoned, the police tape long since removed. She entered, walked through the rooms where they'd laughed, planned, lived. The deck where Jesse had stood before his night's swim. The living room where they'd waited for dawn. The kitchen where she'd grabbed the knife that saved Ethan's life. She walked down to the shore, to the water's edge, and waited. "I know you're there," she said to the lake. "I know you can hear me, show yourself." The water was still, silent, deceptive. "I killed you, I burned you, I sent you back to the deep, but you're not dead, are you? You're still here, still watching, still waiting." A ripple, the surface disturbed by something massive moving below. "Come out," Mara commanded. "Face me." The creature rose. It was changed, scarred. Burns covered its head, its neck, patches of scales missing, replaced by raw, healing flesh. But it was alive, strong, angry. Its golden eyes fixed on her, and she felt the weight of its attention, its intelligence, its hunger. "You took them," she said. "Jesse, Derek, Ethan, you took them all." The creature didn't respond. It simply watched, learning, studying. "I want them back, I want to know they're at peace." The creature moved. Its head lowered, its jaws opening, and from its throat came a sound. Not the song this time, something else. A voice. "Mara." She stumbled back, her heart stopping. The voice was Ethan's, perfect, exact, coming from the creature's throat. "Mara, help me." "No," she gasped. "No, that's not, you're not. I'm here in the dark with the others. It's beautiful, Mara, peaceful, join us." "Stop it," she screamed. "Stop using his voice." The creature closed its mouth, the voice cutting off. When it opened again, the song emerged, low, beautiful, inviting. But Mara was ready. She pressed the obsidian pendant against her chest, focused on her fear, her anger, her grief. "I won't join you," she said. "I won't become part of you." The song faltered. The creature seemed confused, surprised. It had expected her to yield, to surrender, to walk into the water as the others had. "You're weak," Mara said. "I hurt you, I burned you, you can die." The creature screamed, a sound of rage and pain. It thrashed, creating waves that crashed against the shore, soaking Mara's feet. "You think you can kill me?" The voice again, but different now. Layered, multiple voices speaking as one. Jesse, Derek, Ethan, and others, dozens, hundreds, the accumulated memory of everyone the creature had consumed. "We are eternal. We are legion. We are the deep." "You're a parasite," Mara shot back. "A predator. You consume and pretend it's union, but it's not. It's just death, just destruction." "Is it?" The voices were gentle now, persuasive. "We remember them, all of them. Their thoughts, their dreams, their loves. We keep them alive. We are their immortality." "They're dead. You're just wearing their voices like masks." "Are we?" The creature moved closer, its scarred head rising from the water, its eyes level with hers. "Touch us, feel them, know the truth." Mara reached out, her hand trembling. She touched the creature's scales, felt the warmth, the pulse, the life. And she felt them, Jesse's humor, Derek's skepticism, Ethan's determination, all there, all real, all part of the creature's vast consciousness. "They're happy," the voices whispered. "At peace, part of something greater. Join them, Mara, join us." For a moment she was tempted. The peace, the belonging, the end of loneliness and fear. It would be so easy. Just step forward, just enter the water, just let go. But then she felt something else. Something the creature hadn't intended to show her. The truth of what they were. Not at peace. Not happy. Trapped. Consumed. Hollowed out and worn like costumes, their memories used to lure others, their voices used to deceive. "No," she whispered, pulling her hand back. "They're not happy, they're prisoners, and I'm not joining them." The creature screamed, the voices cutting off, replaced by raw animal rage. It lunged, jaws snapping, but Mara was already running, back to the cabin, back to safety. She reached the door, slammed it shut, locked it, barricaded it. The creature crashed against the walls, the deck, the windows, but the cabin held. For now. She sat in the living room, shaking, her mind racing. The creature was more than she'd thought, more intelligent, more powerful, more desperate. And it was healing. The burns were fading, the scales regenerating. Soon it would be strong again, strong enough to hunt openly, strong enough to take more victims. She needed help, real help. Not her grandfather's stories, not Mrs. Patterson's sage, but something scientific, something concrete, something that could actually kill the creature. She pulled out her phone, searched for experts, marine biologists, cryptozoologists, anyone who might believe her, might help her, might know how to stop W. Alia. She found a name, Dr. Riley Kovacs, a marine biologist who'd encountered something similar in Lake Erie, who'd fought creatures that thought, planned, evolved, who'd survived barely and might know how to help. Mara called the number. A woman answered, her voice tired, wary. "Dr. Kovacs, my name is Mara Redhawk. I need to talk to you about monsters, about creatures that live in the deep." A pause, then, "You've seen it." "Yes." "Where?" "Wallowa Lake, Oregon." Another pause, longer this time. "I'm on my way. Don't go near the water, don't listen to the song, and whatever you do, don't let it learn your fear." The line went dead. Mara sat in the silence, waiting, hoping. Dr. Riley Kovacs arrived 2 days later, driving a battered Subaru loaded with equipment. She was older than Mara expected, her face lined with exhaustion and trauma, her eyes sharp with intelligence and caution. "Show me," she said without preamble. Mara led her to the lake, to the shore where the creature had emerged. Riley examined the water, the claw marks on the dock, the signs of struggle. "It's similar," she said, "but different. Mine were serpentine eel-like, yours sounds more crocodilian, more ancient." "It's old. My grandfather said it was here before humans." "They all are." Riley pulled out a device, a modified sonar, she explained, and scanned the water. "The one I fought was part of a colony, a breeding population, thousands of them living in trenches, building cities." "Cities?" "Nests, breeding grounds, places where they live, think evolve." Riley showed her the readings. "Your creature is alone, no colony, no others, just it." "Is that good or bad?" "Both. It's weaker alone, easier to kill, but it's also desperate, hungry, willing to take risks that a colony wouldn't." "Can we kill it?" Riley was silent for a long moment. "I killed the queen of my colony, destroyed the breeding ground, crippled them for decades, maybe centuries, but I didn't kill them all. They're still out there, still waiting." "Then how?" "Fire worked on mine, electricity, but your creature, it's different, older, fire might not be enough." Riley scanned the lake again. "We need to understand it, its biology, its weaknesses." "How do we do that?" "We catch it." They spent the next week preparing. Riley had brought equipment, underwater cameras, tracking devices, sedatives strong enough to knock out a whale. They set traps, laid bait, tried to lure the creature into shallower water where it could be contained. But W. Alia was smart. It avoided the traps, took the bait without triggering the mechanisms, watched and learned and adapted. "It's playing with us," Mara realized. "It knows what we're doing." "They all do." Riley checked the camera feeds. "They're predators, but they're also scholars. They study their prey, learn their patterns, exploit their weaknesses." "Then we need to be unpredictable, do something it doesn't expect." "Like what?" Mara thought of the stories her grandfather had told, of the old ways, of the offerings that had kept the creature satisfied, peaceful, asleep. "We give it what it wants," she said slowly, "but not the way it expects." "Meaning?" "It wants union, connection, to absorb, to consume, to become. What if we offer that, but on our terms?" "I'm not following." "What if I go into the water, willingly, but prepared, armed, ready to fight from the inside?" Riley stared at her. "That's suicide." "Maybe, but it's also the last thing it expects. It thinks I'm afraid, that I'll run, that I'll resist, if I offer myself." "It will consume you, hollow you, make you part of it." "Unless I kill it first." Mara pulled out the obsidian pendant. "This protects me, confuses it. What if I could amplify that, use technology to shield my mind while I attack from within?" "From within?" "It has to open itself to consume, to absorb. In that moment it's vulnerable. If I could strike then." Riley was silent for a long time. "It's insane." "Is it?" "But it might work." Riley pulled out her equipment, started modifying. "I can rig a neural disruptor, something that will fry its nervous system from the inside, but you have to get close, intimate. You have to let it start the process." "I know." "And you might not survive, even if it works, even if we kill it. You might be trapped, lost, part of it forever." "I know." Mara met her eyes. "But I have to try, for Jesse, for Derek, for Ethan, for everyone it's taken." Riley nodded slowly. "Then let's prepare." They worked through the night, modifying equipment, preparing the trap. The neural disruptor was a helmet, fitted with electrodes, powered by a battery pack. It would deliver a shock directly to the creature's nervous system, if Mara could get close enough, if she could survive long enough. At dawn, they were ready. Mara stood at the water's edge, wearing the helmet, the battery pack strapped to her back. Riley stood on the shore, holding the remote trigger, ready to activate the disruptor on Mara's signal. "Last chance," Riley said. "We can find another way." "There's no other way." Mara stepped into the water, feeling the cold surround her, embrace her, welcome her. "This ends today." She walked forward deeper, until the water reached her chest, her shoulders, her chin. She took a breath, then another, then dove. The world went dark. The water was cold, clear, empty. She swam down, following the slope of the lakebed, descending into the depths. She didn't need to search. The creature found her. It rose from below, massive, ancient, its golden eyes gleaming in the darkness. It circled her, studying, learning, deciding. Myra opened her arms, offered herself, willing sacrifice. The creature hesitated. This was wrong. Prey didn't offer themselves. Prey ran, fought, feared. But the hunger was stronger than the suspicion. The creature lunged, jaws opening, and swallowed her whole. Darkness, pressure, the crushing embrace of the creature's throat, its stomach, its being. Myra felt herself being absorbed, dissolved, consumed. Her memories flooding into the creature's consciousness, her thoughts becoming part of its thoughts, herself becoming part of itself. But the helmet held. The neural disruptor protected her, kept her mind separate, distinct, intact. She felt them. Jesse, Derek, Ethan trapped, consumed, but still there, still aware, still fighting. "Now," she whispered, though she had no breath, no voice. "Riley, now." On the shore, Riley pressed the button. The neural disruptor activated. Electricity arced through the creature's nervous system, frying synapses, disrupting coordination, causing chaos. The creature thrashed, screamed, convulsed. Mara felt its pain, its fear, its desperate attempt to expel the foreign object, to save itself. She held on to herself, her identity, her purpose. She was Mara Redhawk. She was human. She was alive. The creature's grip loosened. Its consciousness fragmented, shattered, broke apart under the assault. Mara pushed against the throat, the stomach, the walls of flesh that surrounded her. She found an opening, a weakness, a way out. She burst through, into the water, into the light, gasping, choking, alive. The creature was dying. She could feel it, sense it, the massive consciousness unraveling, the accumulated memories of millennia dissolving into nothing. She swam for the surface, for the air, for life. She broke through, gasping, Riley pulling her onto the shore, holding her, checking her, making sure she was real, whole, alive. "Did it work?" Riley asked. Mara looked back at the water. The surface was still, undisturbed, but she could feel it, the emptiness, the silence. The creature was gone. "It's dead," she whispered. "I felt it die." They sat on the shore, watching the water, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. The lake was just a lake. The water was just water. The creature was gone. "What about the others?" Riley asked. "Jesse, Derek, Ethan, are they?" "Gone," Mara said. "Released. When the creature died, they went with it. They're at peace now." She hoped, she prayed. She didn't know for sure, but she chose to believe. They stayed at the lake for another day, confirming the kill, documenting the evidence, making sure. Then they left, driving away from the water, away from the memories, away from the darkness. Mara never went back. She moved to the city, found a job, built a life. She didn't forget, couldn't forget, but she learned to live with the memory, to carry it without letting it consume her. Riley became a friend, an ally, a partner in the ongoing fight against the creatures that lurked in the deep. They shared information, resources, warnings. They helped others who encountered the impossible, the unknown, the hungry. And sometimes, late at night, Mara would dream of golden eyes, of a song that promised belonging, of a creature that waited in the dark, patient, eternal, hungry. But the dreams faded over time. The fear became manageable. The memory became just that, a memory. She was alive, she was human. She had faced the darkness and survived. That was enough. Epilogue: The Knock. 5 years later. Mara sat on her porch watching the sunset, drinking tea at peace. She had a good life now, a job she loved, friends she trusted, a future that seemed bright. The radio played softly in the background, news of the world, of politics, of disasters natural and human-made. She listened with half an ear, her mind drifting. Then the words caught her attention. Another disappearance at Wallowa Lake. A hiker, last seen near the eastern shore. Authorities are searching, but conditions are difficult. Mara froze. The cup fell from her hand, shattering on the porch. Local authorities are asking anyone with information to come forward. In other news. She stood, her heart pounding, her hands shaking. 5 years. 5 years of peace, of safety, of believing it was over. But it wasn't over. It was never over. She walked to the edge of the porch, looked out at her small yard, her quiet street, her ordinary life. And from beneath the porch she heard it. A knock. Rhythmic, deliberate, like knuckles against wood. Like something asking to be let in. No, she whispered. No, no, no. The knocking continued, patient, persistent, eternal. She backed away, back into the house, locking the door, the windows, barricading herself in. But she knew. It had found her, tracked her, waited. The creature was dead, she'd killed it herself, but the lake remained, the deep remained, and something else, something older, something patient, had taken its place. The knocking stopped. Silence, heavy, absolute, terrible. Then, from beneath the floorboards, from the foundation, from the dark places where water gathered and shadows grew. Mara. Her name spoken in a voice she recognized, a voice she loved. Ethan. Join us, Mara, join us in the deep. She screamed until her throat was raw, her voice gone, her mind breaking. But no one came, no one heard, no one saved her. The knocking resumed, louder now, insistent. And Mara knew with absolute certainty that she would answer, that she would open the door, descend into the dark, join the others in the deep. Not because she was forced, not because she was taken, but because she was called. And the call was beautiful. The Hollow Stride. A horror novel. Chapter 1, Static and Shadows. The VHS player whined like a dying animal, its mechanical guts grinding against decades of dust and disuse. Dr. Samuel Chen leaned closer to the monitor, his breath fogging the glass, his eyes tracking the grainy footage that flickered across the screen in fits and starts. The room was dark, deliberately so, the kind of darkness that pressed against your eyeballs and made you question whether your eyes were actually open. Only the sickly green glow of the monitor provided any illumination, casting Samuel's face in shades of corpse pallor and shadow. He'd found the tape in a storage unit in Fresno, buried beneath moldy cardboard boxes and the detritus of a life abandoned. The label, handwritten in shaky block letters, read simply, NIGHTCRAWLERS Original. Do not copy. Samuel had copied it immediately. Now he sat in his basement laboratory, a converted fallout shelter his grandfather had built during the Cuban Missile Crisis, watching footage that shouldn't exist. The timestamp in the corner of the screen read 03:33 a.m., November 14, 2007. The location, according to the file notes he'd pieced together from newspaper archives and conspiracy forums, was a suburban Fresno neighborhood. A typical California ranch house, beige stucco and red tile roof, filled the frame. The night vision camera, some kind of early consumer model based on the resolution, captured the front yard in shades of phosphorescent green and charcoal black. Nothing moved, nothing breathed. The footage was silent except for the hiss of analog tape degradation and the occasional pop of static. Then they appeared. Samuel's finger hovered over the pause button, but he didn't press it. He couldn't. His hand was frozen, trembling slightly, as two figures emerged from behind the house on the right side of the frame. They moved in perfect synchronization, gliding across the lawn with a fluidity that made Samuel's stomach clench. They were tall, unnaturally so, appearing to be roughly 7 feet in height. But it wasn't their height that made Samuel's breath catch in his throat. It was what they were. Or rather, what they weren't. The figures had no torsos, no arms, no heads. They were simply legs, two pairs of pale, elongated legs that moved with a gait that suggested they were attached to invisible bodies, striding across the grass with the casual confidence of someone out for an evening stroll. The legs were dressed in what appeared to be white fabric, loose, flowing trousers, or perhaps some kind of ceremonial garb that billowed slightly with each step despite the absence of wind. Samuel had seen the viral footage before. Everyone had. The night crawlers of Fresno had become an internet phenomenon in 2007, debated endlessly on forums and debunked by experts who claimed they were simply costumed pranksters, or, more charitably, a pair of stilt walkers captured on a low-quality camera. The official explanation was that two teenagers had created elaborate costumes and walked across their neighbor's lawn as a prank. But this footage was different. This was the original, the source, the tape that had been copied and compressed and uploaded and analyzed until it had lost all definition, becoming just another entry in the canon of unexplained phenomena that populated the darker corners of the internet. Samuel watched the figures complete their traverse of the lawn. They moved from right to left, passing in front of the house, their gait never changing, their pace never faltering. They didn't look at the camera, had no eyes to look with, but Samuel felt the distinct, skin-crawling sensation of being watched, of being seen by something that had no business seeing anything. The figures reached the edge of the frame and vanished into the darkness beyond the house. The timestamp continued for another 30 seconds. Then the screen cut to black. Samuel exhaled, not realizing he'd been holding his breath. His hands were shaking now, adrenaline coursing through his veins with the electric urgency of fear. He'd spent 15 years as a forensic video analyst, specializing in authenticating footage for law enforcement, and more recently, private clients who dealt in the kind of evidence that never made it to official channels. He'd seen things that would drive lesser men to drink or religion or both. He'd analyzed footage of crimes that had no human perpetrator, of shadows that moved independently of their sources, of figures that appeared in reflections where no figures should be. But this was different. This was wrong in a way that defied his professional detachment. He reached for the remote, intending to rewind the tape, to study the footage frame by frame, to apply his analytical mind to the problem of what he had just witnessed. But before his fingers touched the plastic, the monitor flickered. The static that filled the screen wasn't the gentle snow of analog degradation. It was violent, aggressive, a storm of black and white pixels that seemed to writhe with purpose. Samuel jerked back, his chair scraping against the concrete floor as the static resolved into an image. It was his backyard. The camera angle was wrong, too high, as if positioned on the roof of his neighbor's house, but there was no mistaking the view. The overgrown hedge that he'd been meaning to trim for 3 months. The rusted swing set his grandfather had installed in 1962. The concrete patio where he'd grilled steaks last Tuesday, the grease stains still visible in the moonlight. And standing in the center of the lawn, perfectly still, were two pale figures. Samuel's heart stopped, literally stopped for one impossible second before thundering back to life with a violence that made his chest ache. He knew that lawn. He knew every blade of grass, every uneven patch of concrete, every rust spot on that swing set. He'd lived in this house for 8 years, inherited from his grandfather, and he'd spent countless hours in that backyard reading case files and drinking cheap whiskey and trying to forget the things he'd seen. The figures on the screen were identical to the ones in the Fresno footage, same height, same pale coloration, same impossible absence of upper bodies, but they weren't walking now. They were standing perfectly still, their leg-like forms positioned as if waiting for something, as if watching something, as if watching him. Samuel's eyes flicked from the screen to the basement window above his workbench. The window faced the backyard. If he stood on his tiptoes, he could see the hedge, the swing set, the patio. He didn't want to look. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to flee up the stairs and out the front door and keep running until he reached civilization, until he found other people, until he surrounded himself with light and noise and the comforting presence of humanity. But he was a scientist, a skeptic, a man who had built his career on the rigorous examination of evidence, on refusing to accept easy explanations, on looking directly at the darkness and demanding it explain itself. He looked. The window showed only darkness. The backyard was black, impenetrable, the moon hidden behind clouds that had rolled in while he watched the tape. He could see the vague outline of the hedge, the darker shape of the swing set, but nothing else. Nothing that shouldn't be there. He turned back to the monitor. The figures were closer. They hadn't walked, he was certain of that, would have noticed any movement, but they were definitely closer to the camera now. Close enough that he could see details he'd missed in the Fresno footage. The fabric of their garments wasn't fabric at all. It was skin. Pale, translucent skin that rippled and flowed like silk, stretched over forms that had no right to exist. He could see veins beneath the surface, dark lines that pulsed with something that might have been circulation, or might have been something else entirely. And they were facing the camera. Facing him. Samuel's hand found the power button on the monitor. He pressed it hard and the screen went black. The VHS player continued its whining, the tape still feeding through the mechanism, but the image was gone. Just darkness. Just the familiar shapes of his basement laboratory, his workbench, his shelves of equipment and files, and the accumulated detritus of a career spent chasing shadows. He sat in the dark, breathing hard, listening to the sound of his own heartbeat and the mechanical complaint of outdated technology. The rational part of his mind, the part that had earned him a PhD in forensic science and a reputation as the man who could debunk anything, began assembling explanations. The tape had been doctored. Someone had added the backyard footage as a prank, knowing his reputation, knowing he would seek out the original Nightcrawler footage. It was a setup, a hoax, a carefully crafted piece of psychological manipulation designed to frighten him. But how had they known about his backyard? How had they captured the exact angle, the exact details, the exact quality of moonlight that only existed in this specific place at this specific time? And why couldn't he hear the VHS player anymore? Samuel realized with a start that the whining had stopped. The machine had reached the end of the tape, or someone had stopped it, or... He heard movement above him. Footsteps, slow, deliberate footsteps, crossing the kitchen floor directly above his head. The old house creaked and groaned with every step, floorboards protesting the weight pressing down upon them. Samuel's breath caught in his throat. He lived alone. Had lived alone since the divorce, since his ex-wife had taken the kids and moved to Sacramento, since he'd retreated into this house and this work and the comfortable isolation of a man who had seen too much to pretend the world was safe. The footsteps stopped. Directly above the basement door. Samuel's eyes tracked to the wooden staircase that led up to the kitchen. The door at the top was closed. He always kept it closed, a habit from childhood when his grandfather had warned him about the drafts in the old house, but he could see light bleeding around the edges. Not the warm yellow of the kitchen bulbs, but something paler, something that reminded him of the night vision footage, of that sickly phosphorescent green that turned the world into a nightmare landscape. He reached for his phone. His hand found only empty pocket. He'd left it upstairs, charging on the kitchen counter, another habit that suddenly seemed like a fatal mistake. He was alone, isolated, trapped in a basement with no windows large enough to climb through and only one exit that led directly to whatever was walking around his kitchen. The doorknob above turned. Samuel heard the click of the latch, the squeal of hinges that needed oiling, the soft whisper of the door opening. He couldn't see any of it. The basement stairs were around a corner, hidden from his view by a concrete pillar, but he could hear it all with perfect, terrible clarity. Footsteps on the stairs, slow, deliberate, each step accompanied by a sound that Samuel's mind refused to process, a wet, sliding noise that suggested something dragging across the wooden steps. Not shoes, not bare feet, something else. Something that shouldn't make a sound like that, shouldn't move like that, shouldn't exist like that. Samuel stood up. His knees were weak, trembling, but he forced himself to stand, to face whatever was coming down those stairs. He was a scientist, damn it. A rational man. Whatever this was, whoever this was, he would face it with open eyes and a demand for explanation. The footsteps stopped. Samuel waited. His eyes had adjusted to the darkness, picking out the familiar shapes of his laboratory in shades of gray and black. The workbench, the shelves, the filing cabinets, the door to the stairs still around the corner, still hidden from view. "Hello," he called out, and his voice was steady, strong, the voice of a man who refused to be frightened by cheap tricks and elaborate pranks. "I know you're there. Come out where I can see you." Silence. Then movement. Fast movement. A rushing sound like wind through dry leaves, like fabric tearing, like something massive displacing air as it moved through a space too small to contain it. Samuel flinched back, his hands raised defensively, as a shape rounded the corner and filled his vision. It was legs. Just legs. Two of them, pale and elongated, rising from the floor to a height that brushed the ceiling. They moved in a gait that was almost human, step, step, step. But wrong, all wrong. The joints bending in directions that knees shouldn't bend. The feet making that wet, sliding sound against the concrete floor. And they were walking toward him. Samuel backed away, his rational mind finally shattering under the weight of impossible reality. He hit the workbench, felt tools scattering behind him, heard the crash of glass breaking as something fell to the floor. The legs kept coming, moving with that horrible, fluid grace, their pale surfaces seeming to glow in the darkness, the translucent skin rippling with each step. He ran. Not toward the stairs. That way was blocked, that way was death. But toward the far corner of the basement, toward the old coal chute that his grandfather had sealed up in the 70s, toward the only other exit he knew of. His shoulder hit the wall, pain exploding through his arm, but he didn't stop, couldn't stop, because the legs were behind him. He could hear them, that wet sliding sound getting closer, closer, close enough to touch. Samuel reached the coal chute. The metal door was rusted shut, painted over a dozen times, but he grabbed the handle and pulled with all his strength, feeling muscles tear and skin split as he forced the ancient mechanism to move. It gave with a shriek of protest, opening just wide enough for a man to squeeze through. He squeezed. The chute was narrow, claustrophobic, angled upward at 45 degrees toward the backyard. Samuel clawed his way up, feeling rust flakes cutting his palms, feeling the metal groan beneath his weight, feeling the cold night air on his face as he neared the exit. Behind him, in the darkness of the chute, he heard that wet sliding sound. The legs were following. They were in the chute with him, moving with impossible speed, filling the narrow space with their impossible presence. Samuel burst through the exterior grate and into the backyard. He fell to the grass, gasping, his lungs burning, his body screaming with adrenaline and exertion. Above him, the clouds had parted, revealing a moon that seemed too bright, too close, too interested in what was happening below. He scrambled to his feet, looking back at the coal chute. The grate hung open, swaying slightly in a breeze that hadn't existed moments before. The chute was dark, empty. The legs hadn't followed him out. But they were still in the house. Samuel ran. He didn't look back, didn't stop to grab his phone or his keys or his dignity. He ran through the backyard, through the hedge, into the neighbor's yard, and kept running until he reached the street, until he found the streetlights that turned night into artificial day, until he saw another human being, a teenager walking a dog, headphones in, oblivious to the terror that had just burst from the darkness. He stopped, bent over, hands on knees, gasping for breath. The teenager gave him a wide berth, pulling the dog away from the crazy man who had emerged from the shadows, and Samuel didn't blame him. He probably looked insane, probably looked like a threat, probably looked like exactly the kind of person that parents warned their children about. But he wasn't the threat. He looked back at his house. From the street it looked normal, quiet. The lights were off, the windows dark, the front door closed. Nothing moved, nothing breathed. Just a house on a street in a neighborhood in a city where impossible things weren't supposed to happen. Samuel reached into his pocket for his phone, then remembered it was inside, charging on the counter, waiting for him to return. He thought about going back, about being rational, about calling the police and reporting a break-in, reporting an intruder, reporting something that his rational mind could process and categorize and file away under solved. But he knew, with a certainty that went deeper than logic, that if he went back into that house, he wouldn't come out. He walked to the neighbor's house, the Hendersons, an elderly couple who'd lived on this street for 40 years, and knocked on the door. When Mr. Henderson answered, peering through the security chain with suspicious eyes, Samuel asked to use the phone. He called the police, reported a break-in, gave his address, his name, his profession. The dispatcher was professional, calm, taking his information with the bored efficiency of someone who handled dozens of calls like this every night. Then Samuel hung up and walked back to the street. He sat on the curb, wrapped his arms around his knees, and waited for the sirens. They found nothing. The police searched the house from top to bottom. They found the basement laboratory, the VHS player, the monitor, the tape still loaded in the machine. They found Samuel's phone on the counter, his keys on the hook by the door, his life laid out in the mundane details of a single man living alone. They found the broken glass on the floor, the open coal chute, the disturbed earth where Samuel had clawed his way to freedom. But they didn't find any intruders. They didn't find any legs walking without bodies. They didn't find any evidence of the pale figures that had glided across Samuel Chen's backyard and followed him into his basement and chased him through a coal chute into the night. The officer in charge, a tired-looking sergeant named Morrison who'd seen too many false alarms and domestic disputes, suggested that Samuel had fallen asleep while watching a scary movie, suggested that he'd had a nightmare, a panic attack, a psychological episode of some kind, suggested that he might want to talk to someone, a professional, about the stress of his job and the isolation of his lifestyle. Samuel nodded along with all of it. He didn't mention the Fresno footage, didn't mention the original tape, the impossible broadcast, the way the figures had looked directly at him through the screen. He signed the report, accepted a ride to a motel from a sympathetic patrol officer, and spent the night staring at the ceiling, listening for sounds that didn't come. In the morning, he went back to the house. The police had left it unlocked, standard procedure for break-ins where nothing was stolen, and Samuel walked through the rooms like a ghost haunting his own life. The basement was exactly as he'd left it, exactly as the police had found it. The VHS player sat silent, the tape still loaded, waiting for someone to press play. Samuel didn't press play. He packed a bag, clothes, laptop, the essentials. He took his grandfather's old revolver from the bedroom closet, the one he'd never fired, never even loaded, kept only for sentimental reasons, and tucked it into the bag's side pocket. He took the VHS tape, wrapping it in bubble wrap and placing it carefully in a padded envelope. Then he walked out of the house, locked the door behind him, and drove away without looking back. He didn't know where he was going, didn't have a plan, a destination, a purpose beyond the desperate need to put distance between himself and whatever he'd seen in that basement. He drove north on Highway 99, passing through Madera and Chowchilla and Merced, the Central Valley stretching out around him in endless miles of farmland and dust. It wasn't until he reached Modesto that he realized where he was going. Yosemite. Specifically, a cabin near Yosemite, owned by a man named Miguel Santos. Miguel's brother, Jose, had been the original owner of the Nightcrawler footage, the man who'd captured those first impossible images in Fresno in 2007. Jose had died in 2019, found in his apartment with his throat torn out and his eyes burned by some kind of chemical. The police had ruled it a drug deal gone wrong, but the conspiracy forums had other theories. Theories about silencing, about warnings, about the price of capturing images that weren't meant to be captured. Miguel had retreated to the mountains after his brother's death, had become a recluse, a hermit, a man who spoke to no one and saw no one and lived in the shadow of his brother's fame and his brother's fate. Samuel had tried to contact him once, years ago, for a documentary that never got made. Miguel had hung up on him. But that was before the tape, before the basement, before the legs that walked without bodies and followed him through the darkness. Samuel pulled off the highway at the Yosemite exit and followed the winding roads into the mountains. The forest closed around him, dark and dense, the trees pressing against the road like spectators at a parade. He passed campgrounds and trailheads, ranger stations and tourist lodges, until the pavement turned to gravel, and the gravel turned to dirt, and his GPS announced that he had arrived at his destination. The cabin sat in a clearing, surrounded by pines that towered like cathedral pillars toward a sky that was rapidly fading from gray to black. It was smaller than Samuel had expected, a single-story, weathered wood, a stone chimney that leaked smoke into the still air. No lights were visible in the windows, no car in the dirt driveway, no sign that anyone had lived here in years. Samuel parked his car and sat for a moment, engine running, heater blasting against the mountain chill. He could turn around, could drive back to the highway, find a hotel, contact the few colleagues who might believe him, try to make sense of what was happening through the lens of rational investigation and scientific method. But he knew, with the same certainty he'd felt last night, that rationality had nothing to do with this. That science, as he understood it, was a language that couldn't describe what he'd seen. He turned off the engine and stepped into the forest. The air was cold, sharp with the scent of pine and wood smoke, and something else, something organic and ancient that made Samuel think of caves and deep water and places where light had never reached. He walked to the cabin door, his footsteps loud on the wooden porch, and knocked. No answer. He knocked again, harder, and called out, "Miguel Santos, my name is Samuel Chen. I'm here about your brother, about the footage." Silence. Then from inside a sound. Movement. Slow, dragging footsteps that made Samuel's blood run cold with recognition. That wet sliding sound, that impossible gait, the noise of something that walked like a human but wasn't. The door opened. Miguel Santos stood in the doorway, and Samuel barely recognized him from the photographs he'd seen. The man was emaciated, skin stretched tight over bones that seemed ready to pierce through. His eyes were sunken, haunted, the eyes of someone who had seen things that had burned away everything human inside him. He wore a filthy robe that might once have been white, and his feet, Samuel forced himself to look at the feet, were bare and pale and wrong somehow, the toes too long, the arches too high, the skin too translucent. "You brought them," Miguel whispered, and his voice was the sound of dry leaves scraping against stone. "You brought them with you." "I don't understand," Samuel said, though he was beginning to. "I came to ask about—" "The ones that watch from the trees," Miguel interrupted, his eyes flicking past Samuel to the forest behind him. "They're here. They've always been here. My brother found them, filmed them, And they saw him. They saw him and they learned and they came. Samuel turned to look at the forest. The trees stood silent and still, their branches motionless in the windless air. But as he watched, he thought he saw movement between the trunks, pale shapes that might have been moonlight on bark, might have been shadows, might have been something else entirely. "What are they?" Samuel asked, turning back to Miguel. But Miguel was gone. The door was closed, and from inside the cabin, Samuel heard the sound of weeping. He stood on the porch for a long moment, the padded envelope heavy in his hands, the weight of impossible knowledge pressing down upon him like the mountain itself. Then he turned and walked back to his car, started the engine, and drove away from the cabin, away from the forest, away from the things that watched from the trees. He didn't stop until he reached Fresno. The city looked different in the harsh light of morning. Less sinister, more mundane, the kind of place where impossible things weren't supposed to happen. Samuel found a diner, a 24-hour Denny's near the highway, and ordered coffee he didn't drink and pancakes he didn't eat, just to have somewhere to sit and think. He needed help. Professional help, yes. The kind of help that came with degrees and prescriptions and comfortable couches where you could talk about your feelings, but also the kind of help that understood what he was dealing with. The kind of help that didn't dismiss impossible footage as hoaxes or hallucinations. He thought about the documentary that never got made, about the journalists who'd contacted him over the years, looking for expert commentary on paranormal footage, on urban legends, on the cultural phenomenon of internet mysteries. Most of them were hacks, sensationalists looking for clickbait headlines and viral moments, but one of them had been different. Lena Vasquez. She'd contacted him 3 years ago, working on a piece about the lost Nightcrawler footage, the original tape that had never been released to the public, that existed only in rumors and second-hand accounts. Samuel had declined to comment, citing professional obligations, but he'd been impressed by her research. She'd uncovered details about Jose Santos that no one else had found. She'd traced the ownership of the footage through a maze of estate sales and storage auctions. She'd been thorough, professional, skeptical in the way that good journalists are skeptical, not dismissive, but demanding. She might believe him. Samuel pulled out his laptop. He'd grabbed it from the car before entering the diner and searched for her contact information. It took him 20 minutes to find a current email address, buried in the staff directory of a regional newspaper in the Bay Area. He composed a message, deleted it, composed another, deleted that one too. How did you write an email that said, "I found the tape, the creatures are real and they're following me," without sounding like a lunatic? In the end, he kept it simple. "Ms. Vasquez, 3 years ago you contacted me about the original Nightcrawler footage. I told you I couldn't help. I was wrong. I have the tape. I need to talk to you. Please call me. Dr. Samuel Chen." He attached his phone number and hit send before he could change his mind. The response came 2 hours later, while Samuel was still nursing his cold coffee and staring at the parking lot through the diner window. "Dr. Chen, I've been waiting for this email for 3 years. I'm in Fresno on another story, but I can be at your location in 30 minutes. Don't go anywhere. Lena Vasquez." Samuel read the message 3 times, his heart rate increasing with each reading. She was here, in Fresno. Either the universe was playing an elaborate joke, or something was orchestrating events in ways he couldn't understand. He replied with the diner's address and ordered more coffee. Lena Vasquez arrived 25 minutes later, pulling into the parking lot in a dusty Subaru that had seen better decades. She was younger than Samuel expected, mid-30s maybe, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and eyes that assessed him with the sharp intelligence of a predator evaluating prey. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt and hiking boots, the uniform of a journalist who spent more time in the field than in the office. She slid into the booth across from him without asking permission, setting a recorder on the table between them. "Do you mind?" she asked, already pressing the record button. "I'd prefer you didn't," Samuel said. "Then I won't." She turned off the recorder and put it back in her bag. "But I'm going to take notes. Fair warning." "Fair enough." Samuel pushed the padded envelope across the table. "This is what you were looking for, the original tape, the source footage." Lena didn't reach for it. Her eyes stayed on his face, searching for something. "Why now? 3 years ago you wouldn't even confirm this existed. Now you're handing it to me in a Denny's parking lot. What changed?" Samuel told her everything. The storage unit, the basement, the footage that shouldn't exist, the legs in his backyard, the chase through the coal chute, the drive to Yosemite, the meeting with Miguel Santos. He told her about the sounds the creatures made, the way they moved, the feeling of being watched by something that had no eyes. When he finished, Lena was silent for a long moment. Then she reached for the envelope and pulled it toward her, unwrapping the bubble wrap with careful fingers. "This is it," she said, not a question. "This is it. And you've watched it." "I've watched it. And they came." Samuel nodded. Lena was quiet again, her fingers tracing the edge of the tape's plastic case. "My editor thinks I'm insane," she said finally. "He sent me to Fresno to cover a city council meeting. Budget disputes. Very exciting. But I stayed because of the rumors. Because Jose Santos died here and his brother disappeared into the mountains, and people keep whispering about things that walk at night." "What do you think?" Samuel asked. "Do you believe me?" Lena looked up at him, and her eyes were hard, determined, the eyes of someone who had made a decision and would see it through regardless of the consequences. "I think," she said, "that we need to find out what happened to Jose Santos, and I think we need to do it before whatever happened to him happens to us." She slid out of the booth, tucking the tape into her bag. "Come on," she said. "I know where Jose lived, where he died. If we're going to understand this, we need to start at the beginning." Samuel followed her out of the diner, into the harsh California sun, toward a mystery that had already claimed one life and was hungry for more. Behind them, unnoticed, a shadow moved across the parking lot, a long, leg-shaped shadow that glided across the asphalt with impossible grace, following them into the light. But neither of them saw it. Not yet. Chapter 2: The House of Shadows. Jose Santos had lived in an apartment complex on the east side of Fresno, in a neighborhood that had seen better days and wasn't likely to see them again. The building was a 2-story stucco structure, painted in a shade of beige that had faded to the color of old teeth, surrounded by chain-link fence and overgrown oleander bushes. Lena parked on the street and sat for a moment, studying the building through the windshield. "Jose lived in Unit 214, she said. "Top floor, corner unit. The police found him there on March 15, 2019. Throat torn out. Eyes burned. No signs of forced entry." "You know a lot about this," Samuel observed. "I've been researching it for 3 years. Lena opened her door. "Come on. The current tenant is a guy named Carlos Mendez. I called him this morning, told him I was writing a story about the neighborhood. He agreed to let me look around." They climbed the exterior stairs to the 2nd floor, the metal steps ringing under their feet. Unit 214 was at the end of the walkway, its door painted a faded blue that matched none of the other doors on the floor. Lena knocked, and after a moment the door opened to reveal a heavy-set man in his 50s, wearing a tank top and sweatpants and an expression of weary resignation. "You the reporter?" he asked. "Lena Vasquez. This is Dr. Chen. Thank you for seeing us, Mr. Mendez." Carlos stepped aside, letting them enter. The apartment was small, living room, kitchenette, bedroom, bathroom, but clean, furnished with second-hand furniture and the accumulated possessions of a man who lived alone. The walls were bare except for a crucifix above the door and a framed photograph of a woman and 2 children. "My wife and kids," Carlos said, noticing Samuel's glance. They don't visit much, don't like this place. Can you tell us why? Lena asked. Carlos shrugged, a gesture that conveyed volumes of unspoken discomfort. Things happen here, at night, sounds, movements, shadows that don't belong. He crossed himself, a quick, automatic gesture. I stay because the rent is cheap and I have nowhere else to go, but I don't sleep much. What kind of sounds? Samuel asked. Walking. Carlos's voice dropped to a whisper. Like someone pacing back and forth in the living room, but when I get up to look, there's no one there. And the shadows. He shook his head. Sometimes I see shapes in the corner of my eye, tall shapes, thin, like sticks or poles or, he trailed off, unwilling or unable to complete the thought. Like legs, Lena finished. Carlos looked at her, fear naked in his eyes. You know about them. We're trying to understand them, Samuel said. Can you show us where Jose Santos was found? Carlos led them to the bedroom, a small space dominated by a queen-sized bed and a dresser with a mirror. He was here, on the floor. The police said he tried to crawl to the door, but he didn't make it. Samuel knelt, examining the carpet. Even after 3 years, he could see the dark stain where Jose Santos had bled out, the fibers permanently discolored by the violence of his death. He touched the spot, feeling the rough texture and something else, a vibration, almost imperceptible, like the building itself was breathing. What was he working on? Lena asked Carlos. Before he died, do you know? He was obsessed with the footage, Carlos said. The night crawlers. He'd show it to anyone who would watch, talk about how he'd captured something real, something important. He said they were watching him, learning from him. Learning what? How to be human. Carlos's voice was barely audible. He said they were hollow, empty, and they wanted to fill themselves up with us. Samuel stood up, his knees popping. Did he ever mention a project, something called Stiltwalk? Carlos shook his head. Not that I remember, but he had papers, files, boxes of research. The police took most of it, but, he hesitated, glancing toward the closet. I found something they missed. In the ceiling, a loose panel. He crossed to the closet, reached up, and pushed aside a section of ceiling tile. From the space above, he retrieved a metal box, an old ammunition case, rusted and dented. He set it on the bed and stepped back, as if unwilling to touch it further. It's yours, he said. Take it and go. I don't want it here anymore. Lena opened the box. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were papers, dozens of them, yellowed with age, covered in handwriting that varied from precise to frantic. Diagrams, notes, sketches, and photographs. Black and white images of men in military uniforms, of laboratory equipment, of something that looked like a surgical theater. Project Stiltwalk, Samuel read from the topmost document, his voice tight. Classified, 1947. What is it? Lena asked. Samuel spread the papers on the bed, his hands shaking. It's a government program, an experiment they were trying to create. He stopped, unable to process what he was reading. They were trying to create invisible scouts, soldiers who could walk unseen. How? By removing everything that made them human. Samuel's voice was hollow. The torso, the arms, the head, just the legs, just the ability to move, to walk, to carry information back without being seen as people. Lena picked up one of the photographs. It showed a laboratory table, and on the table a pair of human legs. They were attached to a metal frame, tubes running into the stumps where hips should have been. The legs were moving, the photograph capturing them mid-stride, the toes curling as if grasping at air. They succeeded, she whispered. They created monsters, Samuel corrected, and the monsters escaped. From the living room they heard it. That sound. That wet, sliding sound of something moving across carpet with a gait that wasn't quite human, wasn't quite anything that should exist. Carlos whimpered. They're here, they're always here. Samuel and Lena moved to the bedroom door, peering into the living room. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, casting long shadows across the floor. and in those shadows, two pale shapes were emerging from the corner by the television, unfolding themselves from the darkness like origami figures coming to life. They were taller than Samuel remembered, taller than the footage suggested. Their pale skin glowed in the dim light, translucent and veined, rippling with each movement. They had no upper bodies, just legs, impossibly long legs, rising from the floor to a height that brushed the ceiling. And they were walking toward the bedroom. "Run," Samuel said, but his voice came out as a whisper, barely audible. "The window," Lena said, grabbing his arm. "Fire escape." They turned, but Carlos was already moving, shoving past them with a strength born of terror, diving through the window feet first, screaming as he fell the 2 stories to the ground below. They heard the impact, the sickening crunch of bone on concrete, and then silence. The legs kept coming. Samuel grabbed the metal box, hugging it to his chest, and followed Lena to the window. She was already climbing out, her feet finding the metal rungs of the fire escape, moving with desperate speed toward the ground. Samuel hesitated at the window, looking back. The legs had reached the bedroom door. They paused there, filling the frame, their pale surfaces seeming to pulse with an inner light. For a moment, just a moment, Samuel thought he saw something on the upper edge of the legs where torsos should have been. A face, perhaps, or the suggestion of a face, stretched and distorted like wet paper over an invisible frame. Then the legs moved, faster than anything that large should move, and Samuel was through the window, climbing down the fire escape, not looking back, not stopping until his feet hit solid ground. Carlos lay in a heap beside the dumpster, his neck at an impossible angle, his eyes open and staring at nothing. Lena was already at her car, engine running, passenger door open. Samuel ran to her, the metal box clutched against his chest, and threw himself into the seat. Lena floored the accelerator before he even had the door closed, tires squealing as they peeled away from the curb. In the rearview mirror, Samuel saw them. 2 pale shapes standing at the window of Unit 214, watching them go, watching and learning. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice shaking. "Yosemite," Lena said. "To find Miguel Santos. He knows something he's not telling. And whatever these things are, whatever Project Stiltwalk created, he might be the only one who knows how to stop them." Samuel looked down at the metal box in his lap, at the documents that described horrors beyond imagination, at the photographs of men who had thought they could control the darkness. "What if there is no stopping them?" he asked. Lena didn't answer. She just drove, faster and faster, away from the city and toward the mountains, toward the forest where things watched from the trees, toward a truth that might destroy them both. Behind them the sun began to set, and in the lengthening shadows, pale shapes began to move. Chapter 3: The Ones Who Watch. They drove through the night, putting miles between themselves and Fresno, between themselves and the things that walked in shadows. Lena navigated the winding mountain roads with practiced ease, her eyes fixed on the asphalt while her mind raced through the implications of what they'd found. Samuel sat in the passenger seat, the metal box open on his lap, reading the Project Stiltwalk documents by the light of his phone. The more he read, the worse it got. "It started in 1945, he said, his voice barely audible over the engine noise. "After the war, the military was obsessed with reconnaissance, with finding ways to gather intelligence without risking personnel. One of the scientists involved, a man named Dr. Harold Vance, proposed a radical solution." "What kind of solution?" Lena asked. He'd been studying the effects of extreme trauma on the human body, specifically soldiers who'd lost limbs in combat. He noticed something strange. The severed limbs sometimes continued to move for hours after separation. Reflex actions, they called it, but Vance thought it was something more. He thought the limbs retained some kind of consciousness, some fragment of the person they'd been attached to. Lena's hands tightened on the steering wheel. That's insane. That's just the beginning. Samuel flipped to another document, his fingers trembling. Vance proposed creating soldiers who were nothing but limbs. No heads to be targeted, no torsos to be injured. Just legs that could walk into enemy territory, observe, and return. The information would be extracted somehow. He never fully explained the mechanism. But the important thing was that they would be invisible. Not literally invisible, but invisible as threats. Who would shoot at a pair of legs walking across a field? And they actually tried this. They tried everything. Samuel held up a photograph showing a laboratory filled with equipment that looked like it belonged in a torture chamber rather than a medical facility. They started with cadavers, amputated legs from deceased soldiers. They kept them alive, technically alive, using a nutrient solution pumped through the circulatory system, and they discovered something they hadn't expected. He paused, gathering his courage to say the next words. The legs could learn. Lena glanced at him, her face pale in the dashboard light. Learn what? To walk. At first they just twitched, random movements, but over time, weeks, months, they developed coordination, purpose. They could navigate simple mazes, avoid obstacles, respond to stimuli, and they could see. Somehow, without eyes, they could perceive their environment, avoid walls, find doors. That's impossible. So is what we saw in that apartment. Samuel closed the box, unable to look at the documents anymore. In 1947, Vance requested permission to proceed to human trials. Live subjects, prisoners from military stockades, men sentenced to death or life imprisonment. The request was approved by someone high up in the chain of command. One of the documents mentions a General W., but the full name is redacted. How many? 12 men, selected from various military prisons. They were told they'd be participating in a rehabilitation program, a chance to reduce their sentences by contributing to medical science. Samuel's voice cracked. They weren't told they'd be reduced to walking legs. Lena was silent for a long moment, the car's headlights cutting through the darkness of the forest. What happened to them? The procedure worked. That's the horror of it. The procedures worked perfectly. They removed everything above the waist, torso, arms, head, and kept the legs alive using Vance's nutrient solution. The legs could walk, could navigate, could follow simple commands conveyed through electrical impulses to the nervous system. And they could learn, faster than the cadaver legs, much faster. Within months they were performing complex tasks, mapping terrain, identifying targets. Even, Samuel stopped, his throat constricting. Even what? Even mimicking human behavior. The researchers would walk past the containment units and the legs would copy their gait, their posture, the way they moved. One of the reports mentions a subject that learned to limp because one of the researchers had a limp. It saw him and it copied him. Lena shuddered. That's what we saw in the footage. They were copying someone. They were learning. Samuel stared out the window at the passing trees, dark shapes that seemed to lean toward the road as the car passed. But something went wrong. In 1948, there was an incident at the facility, a containment breach. All 12 subjects escaped. Escaped how? The reports are unclear. Some kind of power failure maybe, or sabotage, but the legs got out. They walked out of the facility, past the guards, past the fences, into the desert beyond. The military sent search parties, but they never found them, not all of them. They recovered 3 eventually, destroyed them, but the other 9, they vanished. Until Fresno, until 2007. Until now. Samuel turned to look at her. Lena, these things have been out there for 70 years, learning, evolving, multiplying. The documents suggest they can reproduce by absorbing human movement patterns, by copying people so completely that they become copies themselves, hollow copies. The hollow, Lena whispered, remembering Carlos's words. That's what Jose said, they were hollow. And they want to fill themselves up. Samuel gripped the box until his knuckles turned white. They want to become human, or at least they want to imitate humanity so perfectly that no one can tell the difference. The car rounded a bend, and suddenly the forest opened up, revealing a vista of mountains against a star-filled sky. Lena pulled over at a scenic overlook, killing the engine, and they sat in silence, listening to the night sounds of the wilderness. "Miguel knows," she said finally. "He knows what they are, what they want. We need to make him talk." "And if he won't?" "Then we make him." Lena opened her door. "Come on, we need to get to his cabin before dawn. I have a feeling these things are more active at night." They drove the remaining miles in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, their own fears. The road deteriorated further, becoming little more than a dirt track winding through dense forest. Twice, Samuel thought he saw movement in the trees alongside the road, pale shapes that might have been birch trunks or might have been something else. But when he looked directly, there was nothing there. Miguel's cabin appeared suddenly, emerging from the darkness like a memory of a place rather than a physical structure. It looked exactly as Samuel remembered from his previous visit: weathered wood, stone chimney, no lights in the windows. But something was different. Something was wrong. "The door is open," Lena observed, her voice low. Samuel looked. She was right. The cabin's front door stood ajar, swaying slightly in a breeze that shouldn't exist in the still mountain air. "Stay in the car," he said, reaching for the door handle. Like hell. Lena was already out, moving toward the cabin with the determined stride of a journalist who'd learned never to wait for permission. Samuel followed, the metal box forgotten in the car, his hands empty and useless. They approached the door together, listening. From inside they heard nothing. No movement, no breathing, just the empty silence of an abandoned space. Lena pushed the door open. It swung inward on hinges that screamed protest, revealing a single room that served as living space, kitchen and bedroom combined. A wood stove sat cold in one corner, a cot against the wall, a table with 2 chairs, and everywhere, covering every surface, drawings. Hundreds of drawings, sketches in pencil, in charcoal, in what looked like dried blood, all of them showing the same subject: legs, walking legs, pale legs, legs without bodies, without heads, without anything that made them human except their terrible, perfect imitation of humanity. "Miguel," Lena called out. "It's Lena Vasquez. We met 3 years ago. I'm here about your brother, about Jose." No answer. They moved deeper into the cabin, stepping carefully around the scattered drawings. Samuel noticed that the sketches weren't random. They were organized, sequential, showing the creatures in various stages of development. Early drawings showed simple leg forms, crude and unfinished. Later ones showed more detail: the translucent skin, the visible veins, the way the limbs moved with fluid grace. And the most recent drawings, the ones that covered the table and the walls nearest the door, showed something else. Faces. Not human faces. Not exactly. But the suggestion of faces, stretched across invisible frameworks above the legs, like masks made of wet paper or dough. The features were wrong, too wide, too flat, the eyes empty holes that seemed to stare back at the viewer with terrible intelligence. "He's been studying them," Samuel whispered, "for years, documenting their evolution." "Or they've been showing him," Lena said, "teaching him what they are, what they're becoming." A sound from the corner of the room made them both freeze. A rustling, like paper being moved, like fabric sliding against fabric. They turned slowly to face the source. Miguel Santos sat in the corner, wedged between the wood stove and the wall, his knees drawn up to his chest, his eyes wide and unseeing. He was naked except for a filthy blanket wrapped around his shoulders, and his skin was wrong. It was pale, translucent, the veins visible beneath the surface in a pattern that matched the drawings on the walls. "You came back," he whispered, his voice the sound of dry leaves scraping stone. "I knew you would. They told me you would." "Miguel," Samuel said carefully, crouching down to the man's level, We need to talk to you about Project Stiltwalk, about the creatures, about how to stop them." Miguel laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Stop them? You can't stop them. No one can stop them. They've been walking since before you were born, before your grandfather was born. They walk and they watch and they learn, and when they're ready, when they've learned enough, they take." "Take what?" Lena asked. "Everything." Miguel's eyes focused on her, suddenly sharp, suddenly sane in a way that was more frightening than his madness. "They take your walk, your talk, your thoughts, your memories. They hollow you out and wear you like a suit, and no one knows the difference. No one knows until it's too late." Samuel thought of the apartment in Fresno, of the way the legs had paused at the bedroom door, of the face he'd thought he'd seen, stretched across their upper edges like wet paper. "Jose," he said, "what happened to Jose?" Miguel's face crumpled, grief and terror warring for dominance. He filmed them. He thought he was documenting something new, something unknown, but they saw him. They saw him watching, and they started to learn. They learned his walk. His limp, he had a limp from a childhood accident. They learned it. They copied it. And then... Then what? Then they came for him. Miguel's voice dropped to a whisper. "I was there. I saw it. They walked into his apartment, just walked through the door like they had every right to be there, and they stood over his bed while he slept. And they reached for him, with legs that shouldn't have been able to reach, with surfaces that opened up like mouths. And they pulled him into themselves, absorbed him, made him part of them." "That's impossible," Samuel said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" Miguel gestured at the drawings on the walls. "Look at them, really look. Tell me what you see." Samuel looked. At first he saw only the legs, the pale forms, the terrible imitation of humanity. But as he studied the more recent drawings, he began to see details he'd missed. The faces weren't just stretched masks. They were specific, individual. One of them had Jose's features, the broad nose, the scar above the eyebrow, the particular set of the jaw. Another had features Samuel didn't recognize, but Lena gasped when she saw it. "That's Carlos," she said. "The man in the apartment, the man who just died," Miguel finished. "Yes, they're fast learners, fast copiers. Once they have your pattern, your gait, your way of moving through the world, they can become you, or a version of you, a hollow version." "But why?" Samuel asked. "What's the purpose?" "Purpose?" Miguel laughed again, that broken sound. "There's no purpose. There's only hunger, the hunger to be real, to be solid, to be human. They're empty, Dr. Chen, empty and hungry, and they've been empty and hungry for 70 years. He pulled the blanket tighter around his shoulders, and Samuel saw something that made his blood run cold. Miguel's legs, his actual legs, protruding from beneath the blanket, were wrong. Too long, too thin. The joints bending in directions that knees shouldn't bend. "Miguel," he said carefully, "how long have you been here, in this cabin?" "Since Jose died. Since I realized what they were and what they wanted, I came here to hide, to stay away from people, from movement, from anything they could learn from." Miguel's voice was distant, dreamy. "But they found me. Of course they found me. They've been visiting for years, teaching me, showing me what they're becoming." "And what are they becoming?" Miguel looked up at them, and his eyes were no longer human. They were hollow, empty, the eyes of something that had learned to imitate life but had never felt it. "They're becoming us," he said, "and we're becoming them." The blanket fell away, and Samuel saw the truth. Miguel Santos wasn't sitting in the corner. He was fused to the corner. His torso, what remained of it, was merged with a pale, leg-like form that filled the space between the stove and the wall. The creature's translucent skin had grown around Miguel's body, absorbing him, incorporating him into its structure. His legs were gone, replaced by the creature's limbs. His arms hung useless at his sides, the hands twitching with involuntary spasms. "He's half assimilated," Lena whispered, backing away. "Oh God, Samuel, he's half assimilated." "Not half," Miguel said, and his voice was wrong now, layered with another voice, a voice that sounded like wet paper tearing. "Almost whole, almost complete. They've learned so much from me, my walk, my talk. My memories. Soon I'll be able to leave this cabin. Soon I'll be able to walk among you and no one will know the difference. Samuel grabbed Lena's arm, pulling her toward the door. We need to go, now. But the information. There's no information, Samuel shouted, dragging her toward the exit. He's not human anymore, he's one of them. They reached the door, but it slammed shut before they could touch it, the force of the impact shaking the entire cabin. Behind them, Miguel, or the thing that had been Miguel, was moving, detaching itself from the wall with a sound like tearing fabric, like wet meat separating from bone. You can't leave, the thing said, and its voice was Miguel's and not Miguel's, human and inhuman layered together. You've already been seen. You've already been learned. They know your walk, Dr. Chen. They know your limp. I don't have a limp, Samuel said, but even as he spoke, he felt it. A twinge in his left knee, an old injury from his college soccer days, something he'd thought healed decades ago. He'd been favoring that leg without realizing it, compensating for pain that shouldn't exist. Everyone has a limp, the Miguel thing said, advancing toward them. Everyone has a pattern, a way of moving through the world, and they've learned yours. They learned it when you watched the tape, when you invited them into your home, into your life. The cabin seemed to shrink around them, the walls pressing in, the ceiling lowering. The drawings on the walls began to move, the sketched legs walking their paper surfaces, converging toward the center of the room. And from outside, from the forest that surrounded the cabin, came sounds. That wet sliding sound. The sound of many legs, walking in synchronization, approaching from all directions. The window, Lena said, pointing to the small square of glass beside the wood stove. They ran for it, Samuel boosting Lena up, feeling her boots scramble against his shoulders as she climbed. The glass shattered outward and she tumbled through, falling to the ground outside with a grunt of pain. Samuel followed, squeezing through the narrow opening, feeling the broken glass cut his arms and back, not caring, only needing to be out, to be away, to be free. He hit the ground rolling, coming up to find Lena already on her feet, her face pale in the moonlight, blood running from a cut on her forehead. The car, she gasped, run. They ran. Through the clearing, past the dark bulk of the cabin, toward the dirt track where they'd left the Subaru. Behind them, the cabin door opened, and something emerged. Something that walked on two legs but wasn't human. Something that wore Miguel's face stretched across its upper surface like a mask, the features moving independently, the mouth opening in a smile that showed too many teeth. They reached the car. Lena fumbled for her keys, dropped them, scooped them up with shaking hands. The engine turned over, caught, roared to life. She slammed it into drive and floored the accelerator, tires throwing up clouds of dirt and pine needles as they shot forward. In the rearview mirror, Samuel saw them. Dozens of them now emerging from the forest, from the cabin, from the shadows themselves. Pale shapes that walked with perfect synchronization, their leg-like forms moving with that terrible, fluid grace. And at their center, the Miguel thing, walking with a gait that was almost human, almost natural, the limp barely perceptible. They're following, he said, his voice hollow. They can't keep up, Lena said, but she didn't sound convinced. She was right, though. The creatures fell behind, their pale forms disappearing into the darkness of the forest. But Samuel knew, they both knew, that they hadn't given up. They'd learned what they needed to learn. They'd seen how these two humans moved, walked, ran. They'd add that knowledge to their collection, their endless imitation of humanity. And someday, when the time was right, they would use it. They drove until dawn, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and the cabin, between themselves and the things that watched from the trees. They stopped at a gas station near the entrance to Yosemite National Park, filling the tank and buying coffee they didn't drink, just to be around other people, to be in the light. What do we do now? Lena asked, staring at her reflection in the convenience store window. We tell someone, Samuel said. The authorities, the media, someone has to know, someone has to stop them. And tell them what? That government experiments from the 1940s created walking legs that absorb people and wear their faces. They'll lock us up. They'll say we're crazy. We have evidence. Samuel gestured toward the car, toward the metal box still sitting on the back seat. The documents, the photographs, the tape. Evidence that proves a 70-year-old government conspiracy. Evidence that shows creatures that shouldn't exist. Lena shook her head. Samuel, I've been a journalist for 15 years. I know how this works. They'll bury it. They'll bury us. And the creatures will keep walking, keep learning, keep taking. Samuel was silent, knowing she was right. The system wasn't designed to handle truths like this. The system was designed to maintain the illusion of normalcy, to keep people calm and compliant and unaware of the darkness that walked among them. Then we fight them ourselves, he said finally. We find out where they came from, where they're based, how they reproduce. We find their weakness. And if they don't have one, everything has a weakness. Samuel finished his coffee, crushing the cup in his hand. We just have to find it before they find us. They got back in the car and drove south, toward Fresno, toward the beginning of the nightmare. Behind them, the sun rose over the mountains, casting long shadows across the landscape. And in those shadows, pale shapes moved with purpose, walking, watching, learning. Always learning. Chapter 4, The Mimicry. They returned to Fresno as the city was waking up, the morning commute beginning in earnest, the streets filling with people who had no idea what walked among them. Samuel felt a profound disconnect from these ordinary lives, these ordinary concerns. How could they worry about traffic and coffee and deadlines when creatures of living nightmare were learning to imitate them? Lena drove to a motel on the outskirts of town, a cheap chain establishment that asked no questions and accepted cash. They checked into adjoining rooms, agreeing to meet in the lobby in 2 hours after they'd had a chance to rest and regroup. Samuel didn't rest. He sat on the edge of the bed, the metal box open in front of him, studying the project's Stiltwalk documents with the desperate intensity of a man trying to solve a puzzle that might save his life. There had to be something here, some detail he'd missed, some weakness in the creature's biology or behavior. He found it in a handwritten note, tucked between 2 official reports. The note was in a different hand than the rest of the documents, looser, more frantic, the writing of someone who was either excited or terrified. Subject 7 shows unusual response to auditory stimuli, the note read. Specifically, to recordings of its own movement patterns. When played back at high volume, subject becomes disoriented, loses coordination. Possible application for containment, further testing required. Samuel read the note 3 times, his heart racing. A weakness. The creatures could be disoriented by the sound of their own movements played back to them. It made sense in a twisted way. They learned by observing and copying human movement patterns. If they encountered their own patterns, amplified and distorted, it might confuse their sensory systems, disrupt their ability to coordinate. He grabbed his phone and called Lena's room. I found something, he said when she answered, a way to fight them. They met in Samuel's room, the document spread across the bedspread, the note in question highlighted with yellow marker. Audio disruption, Lena said, reading the note. But how do we use this? We don't have recordings of their movements. We have the tape, Samuel pointed out. The original Nightcrawler footage. That's a recording of their movements. If we can amplify it, play it back at high volume. It might disorient them. Lena nodded slowly. But we'd need serious equipment, speakers, amplifiers, a power source, and we'd have to lure them somewhere we could control the environment. The lake, Samuel said suddenly. Wallowa Lake in Oregon. Lena looked at him, confused. What about it? I read about it while researching Jose Santos. He mentioned it in one of his online posts, a place where the creatures were particularly active. Something about the water, the depth, the way sound travels across the surface. He thought they were drawn there. that it was important to them somehow. That's a long way to go on a hunch. Do you have a better idea? Lena was silent for a moment, then shook her head. No, I don't. But if we're going to do this, we need to be prepared. We need equipment, supplies, and exit strategy. Agreed. Samuel gathered the documents, returning them to the metal box. I'll find us audio equipment. You research the lake, the terrain, the best places to set up. We'll leave tonight. They spent the day preparing. Samuel visited a music store and an electronics supplier, purchasing portable speakers, amplifiers, and a generator powerful enough to run it all. Lena researched Wallowa Lake, discovering it was a deep mountain lake in northeastern Oregon, surrounded by wilderness, the subject of numerous legends and disappearances. There's a pattern, she told Samuel when they met that evening. Every 30 years or so, there are reports of drownings, disappearances, strange sightings near the lake. The local tribes, the Nez Perce, have stories about a creature called Walia, the Devourer. They say it's a guardian spirit that was betrayed and turned vengeful. A guardian spirit, Samuel repeated, or a government experiment that escaped and found a home in the deep water. Maybe both. Lena showed him her notes. The most recent cluster of incidents was in 2023. A group of college students went missing. One body was recovered, hollowed out, just like Jose Santos. The official report said bear attack, but bears don't hollow people out. Samuel loaded the equipment into Lena's car, and they don't happen every 30 years like clockwork. They drove north, leaving Fresno behind, leaving the creatures behind, or so they hoped. The journey took 12 hours, Lena driving through the night while Samuel slept fitfully in the passenger seat, haunted by dreams of walking legs and stretched faces. They reached Wallowa Lake at dawn, the sun rising over the Wallowa Mountains, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. The lake was beautiful, serene, the surface like glass reflecting the surrounding peaks. It was hard to imagine that anything sinister lurked beneath that calm exterior. There, Lena said, pointing to a spot on the eastern shore. A secluded cove, good sight lines, limited access close to the water. They set up camp in the cove, hiding the car in a thicket of trees and unloading their equipment. The portable speakers went on the shore, aimed at the water, connected to the generator and the laptop that held the digitized Nightcrawler footage. Now what? Lena asked, looking at the peaceful lake. Now we wait, Samuel said, and hope they come. They didn't have to wait long. As the sun climbed higher, the lake began to change. The surface, which had been glass calm, developed ripples that seemed to originate from nowhere, spreading outward in concentric circles. The water darkened, taking on a greenish hue that suggested depth, terrible depth, and something moving in the darkness below. Something's happening, Lena whispered. Samuel started the generator. The speakers hummed to life, ready to broadcast. He queued up the footage, his finger hovering over the play button. Get ready, he said. The water erupted. Not from the center of the lake, but from the shore. From the very spot where they stood. The ground beneath their feet seemed to liquefy, to open up, and pale shapes emerged, dozens of them, hundreds, rising from the earth itself as if the soil was giving birth to nightmare. They were different from the creatures in Fresno. Larger, older. Their translucent skin was darker, tinged with green and brown, covered in what looked like algae or moss. And they were more complete. Where the Fresno creatures had been just legs, these had torsos, rudimentary arms, heads that were little more than lumps of flesh with gaping mouths. They're evolving, Samuel breathed. They're becoming more human. The creatures advanced, moving with that terrible, fluid grace, their numbers filling the cove, blocking the path to the car. Samuel could see faces on them now, not copied faces, not learned faces, but original features, twisted and wrong, the faces of things that had never been human but wanted desperately to become so. Now, Lena screamed. Samuel hit play. The sound that erupted from the speakers was deafening, a distorted, amplified version of the Nightcrawler footage, the sound of those pale legs walking across grass, across concrete, across the earth itself. The sound of their gait, their rhythm, their terrible purpose. The effect was immediate and devastating. The creatures froze, their movements stuttering, jerking like marionettes with tangled strings. They tried to walk, to advance, but their coordination failed them. They stumbled, fell, crashed into each other with sounds like wet meat hitting stone. The ones closest to the speakers convulsed, their translucent skin rippling, tearing, revealing the hollow darkness within. "It's working," Lena shouted over the noise. "Keep playing it." But Samuel saw the problem. The creatures were disoriented, yes, damaged, certainly, but they weren't dying. They were adapting. Even as he watched, the ones furthest from the speakers began to recover, their movements smoothing out, their coordination returning. They were learning to filter the sound, to process it as background noise rather than threat. "They're adapting," he said, his voice barely audible over the speakers. "They learn too fast." Then we increased the volume. Lena reached for the amplifier controls, but before she could touch them, the generator died. The speakers fell silent, the only sound the lapping of water against the shore and the wet sliding of dozens of creatures recovering their coordination. "No," Samuel whispered. The creatures advanced. Slowly, carefully, learning from their mistake, approaching from multiple angles to prevent another audio attack. They surrounded the cove, cutting off all escape routes, their pale forms reflecting in the morning light like obscene sculptures carved from soap and bone. "The water," Lena said suddenly. "We have to get in the water." "Are you insane? That's where they came from." "Exactly." She was already moving, running toward the lake's edge. "They came from the water, which means they were hiding there, which means they don't want to go back." It was thin logic, desperate logic, but it was all they had. Samuel followed her, the metal box clutched against his chest, the documents inside their only proof of what was happening, what these things were, why they needed to be stopped. They hit the water together, the cold shocking their systems, driving the breath from their lungs. They swam, awkward and panicked, toward the center of the lake where the water was deepest, where the creatures from the shore couldn't follow. But they were wrong about that. The creatures entered the water without hesitation, their leg-like forms propelling them through the liquid with terrifying speed. They didn't swim. They walked, their pale limbs finding purchase on the lakebed below, striding through the water as easily as they walked on land. "Dive," Samuel gasped, and they dove, swimming downward, seeking depth, seeking darkness, seeking anything that might hide them from the hunters above. The lake was deeper than it should have been. They swam down, the pressure building in their ears, their lungs burning, and still the bottom remained out of reach. The water grew colder, darker, and Samuel began to see things in the depths below, shapes that moved with purpose, vast forms that stirred the silt into clouds of obscuring darkness. Something brushed his leg, something with fingers. He screamed, bubbles erupting from his mouth, precious air escaping into the dark water. He thrashed, kicking, feeling whatever it was release him, and then Lena was there, grabbing his arm, pulling him sideways, away from the depths. They surfaced in a pocket of air, a bubble, impossible, trapped beneath the overhanging roots of a massive tree that had fallen into the lake decades ago. The roots formed a cage around them, a natural prison that kept them hidden from the surface but trapped them with their own exhaustion. "What is this place?" Lena gasped, treading water in the confined space. "A hiding spot," Samuel said, listening. Above them, through the tangle of roots, he could see pale shapes moving in the water, searching. The creatures were hunting them, methodical and patient, sweeping the lake in patterns that suggested intelligence, strategy, learning. "We can't stay here," Lena said. "We'll drown or freeze or they'll find us." "I know." Samuel looked around the root cage, searching for another exit. The tree was massive, its trunk wider than a car, the roots extending deep into the lake bed. But there, on the far side where the roots were thinnest, he saw a gap, small but maybe large enough. "There," he said, pointing. "We swim through, surface on the other side, make for the shore while they're searching here. And if they're waiting, then we fight." Samuel didn't know how they'd fight creatures that could absorb bullets, that could learn from their attackers, that could wear the faces of their victims. But he knew they couldn't just give up, couldn't just let themselves be hollowed out, worn like suits, their memories and movements copied by things that had never been human. They took deep breaths, filling their lungs and dove. The gap was tighter than it looked, the roots scraping their skin as they squeezed through. Samuel felt something give way in his shoulder, a dislocation, maybe, or just a bad twist. But he didn't stop, couldn't stop, because behind him he could feel the water moving, the creatures closing in, their pale limbs reaching through the roots like fingers through a cage. They emerged on the other side, surfacing quietly, carefully. The shore was 50 yards away, a stretch of open water between them and safety. And the creatures were all around them, dozens of pale shapes walking through the water, searching, hunting. "On three," Samuel whispered. "Swim for the shore, don't stop, don't look back." 1. He could see them now, really see them in the morning light. They were more complete than the Fresno creatures, more human in their construction but wrong in every detail. The proportions were off, legs too long, torsos too short, arms that hung to the ground. The faces, when they had faces, were stretched, distorted features that had been copied from humans but applied to frames that couldn't support them. 2. One of the creatures turned. Its face was blank, featureless, just smooth, pale skin stretched over an invisible skull. But as it oriented toward them, the skin began to move, to shift, features emerging like shapes rising from deep water. A nose, eyes, a mouth. Samuel's mouth. 3. They swam, thrashing through the water with desperate energy. Behind them, the creatures reacted, their coordinated search pattern breaking as they converged on the fleeing humans. Samuel didn't look back, didn't need to look back to know that they were being pursued, that pale limbs were cutting through the water behind them, that gaping mouths were opening in anticipation. They hit the shore, scrambled up the rocky beach, ran for the tree line. The creatures followed, emerging from the water with that terrible wet sound, their leg-like forms finding purchase on land, resuming their pursuit with renewed speed. "The car," Lena screamed, pointing. The Subaru was where they'd left it, hidden in the thicket. They ran for it, Samuel's injured shoulder screaming, his lungs burning, his legs pumping with adrenaline-fueled desperation. Behind them, the creatures were gaining, their inhuman speed closing the distance, their pale forms visible in his peripheral vision like afterimages of nightmare. They reached the car. Lena fumbled for her keys, dropped them, scooped them up, unlocked the doors. They piled in, Samuel in the passenger seat, the metal box clutched in his lap. The engine turned over, caught, roared. A pale hand, a hand that was also a foot, fingers that were also toes, reached through the open window, grasping for Samuel's throat. He slammed the door on it, feeling bones, if they were bones, crunch under the impact. The creature shrieked, a sound like tearing metal, and withdrew. Lena floored the accelerator, tires spinning on dirt and pine needles before catching, launching them forward. They crashed through the thicket, branches scraping the windows, the car bouncing on uneven terrain. Behind them, the creatures followed, running with that terrible, fluid grace, keeping pace for longer than should have been possible. But the car was faster, the engine more powerful than any biological adaptation, and slowly, gradually, the pale forms receded into the distance. They didn't stop driving until they reached the highway, until they saw other cars, other people, the comforting normalcy of civilization. They pulled over at a rest stop, shaking, gasping, the reality of their narrow escape sinking in with delayed force. "They knew," Lena said, her voice hollow. They knew we were coming, they were waiting for us. Or they followed us, Samuel said. From Fresno, from the cabin, they learn, Lena, they remember, they plan. Then nowhere is safe. She rested her forehead against the steering wheel, exhaustion washing over her in waves. Nowhere we go, they'll find us, learn us, copy us. Not if we find them first. Samuel opened the metal box, spreading the documents across his lap. There has to be something here, some origin point, some central location where they breed or nest or whatever they do. He found it in a map, tucked into the back of the box. A hand-drawn diagram showing the continental United States, with dots scattered across it in patterns that suggested migration routes. The dots were dated, showing the spread of the creatures over time. Starting in 1948 in the desert near the original Project Stiltwalk facility. Spreading slowly at first, then faster as they learned, as they multiplied, as they developed their ability to copy and assimilate. And at the center of the pattern, the place where the most recent dots clustered, where the density was highest, Wallowa Lake. This is it, Samuel said, his voice hushed. This is where they come from, where they return, where they reproduce. Reproduce how? Lena asked. Samuel studied the map, the dates, the pattern of spread. They need hosts, human hosts. They absorb them, copy them, hollow them out, and from the husk, something new emerges. Something that walks like the host, talks like the host, remembers like the host, but isn't the host. The lake, Lena whispered. The disappearances, the drownings, they're not accidents, they're harvests. Every 30 years, Samuel agreed. Like clockwork, they need fresh genetic material, fresh memories, fresh patterns to copy. And when they've collected enough, when they've learned enough, they spread. The 1948 escape was just the beginning, Lena said, understanding dawning. They've been spreading ever since, slowly, carefully, learning to hide, learning to imitate. And now they're ready, Samuel finished. 70 years of learning, 70 years of preparation. They're ready to come out of hiding, to walk among us, to replace us. They sat in silence, the weight of their discovery pressing down upon them like physical force. The creatures weren't just monsters. They were an invasion, a slow, patient invasion that had been happening for decades, right under humanity's nose. We need help, Lena said finally. Real help, military, government, someone with resources, with firepower, with the ability to contain this. And tell them what? Samuel asked. The same thing we discussed before. They'll think we're crazy, or they'll know already the government created these things after all. Maybe they're still controlling them. Maybe this is exactly what they wanted. Then we go public, Lena said. We release everything. The documents, the footage, our testimony. We make it impossible to ignore. And if they kill us first, if they wear our faces and release statements saying we made it all up, that we're mentally ill, that we're seeking attention. Lena had no answer for that. They drove south in silence, putting miles between themselves and the lake, between themselves and the creatures that walked and watched and learned. They stopped at a hotel in Bend, Oregon, paying cash, using false names, trying to disappear into the anonymity of the road. But they couldn't disappear, not completely, not when the creatures had already learned their patterns, their gaits, their ways of moving through the world. Samuel saw it first, a reflection in the hotel lobby window as they checked in, a figure standing on the street outside watching them, tall, thin, moving with a slight limp favoring the left leg. His limp. He didn't point it out to Lena, didn't want to panic her, didn't want to admit what he was seeing. But he watched as they walked to their rooms, as the figure followed at a distance, its gait matching his own, its posture copying his own, becoming more Samuel-like with every step. They reached their rooms adjoining, as requested, and Samuel waited until Lena was inside before turning to face the hallway. The figure was there at the far end, standing motionless, watching. I see you, Samuel said, his voice steady despite his fear. I know what you are. The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, learning, copying, becoming. Samuel entered his room, locked the door, chained it, pushed the dresser against it. He sat on the bed, the metal box beside him, and waited for morning. He didn't sleep. Chapter 5: The Hollow Woman. Morning came, gray and cold, with no sign of the figure in the hallway. Samuel met Lena in the hotel restaurant, both of them hollow-eyed from lack of sleep, both of them pretending that everything was normal, that they weren't being hunted by creatures that wanted to wear their skin. "We need to split up," Lena said over coffee that neither of them drank. "They're learning both of us. If we separate, they can only learn one of us at a time. The other can do something, warn people, get help. And if they catch you, if they wear your face, then you'll know." Lena's eyes were hard, determined. "You'll know because I'll send you a message, something only the real me would know, and if you don't get that message, you'll know they've replaced me." "This is insane. This is survival." She reached across the table, taking his hand. "Samuel, I've been a journalist my whole adult life. I've chased stories into war zones, into disaster areas, into places where people weren't supposed to go. I've always known that someday I might not come back, but this is different. This isn't just death. This is erasure, being replaced, being worn like a costume by something that doesn't even understand what it means to be human. I won't let that happen to you. You may not have a choice." She squeezed his hand, then let go. "I'm going to San Francisco. I have contacts there, people who might believe me, might help me get this story out. You go to Los Angeles. Find a television station, a newspaper, anyone who will listen. Show them the documents. Show them the tape. And if they don't believe us, then we keep trying, until someone does, until the world knows what's coming." They parted in the parking lot, Lena climbing into her Subaru, Samuel standing beside it, feeling like he was watching her drive into danger with no way to protect her. "The message," he said, "if you're still you, what will it say?" Lena smiled, a sad, tired smile. "It'll say, remember the diner, the Denny's in Fresno, where we first met, where this started." "I remember." "Good." She started the engine. "Don't forget, no matter what happens, don't forget who you are." She drove away, the Subaru disappearing into the morning traffic, and Samuel was alone. He rented a car, paying cash, using a false name, and drove south toward Los Angeles. The journey took 10 hours, 10 hours of checking his rearview mirror, of watching for pale shapes in the cars behind him, of jumping at shadows that moved with wrong fluidity. He reached LA at night, the city sprawling before him in a blaze of artificial light that seemed to push back the darkness. He checked into a motel in Hollywood, a seedy establishment that asked no questions, and spent the night with the television on, the noise and light his only defense against the things that might be watching from outside. In the morning he began his campaign. He called television stations, newspapers, radio shows. He identified himself as Dr. Samuel Chen, forensic video analyst, with evidence of a government conspiracy and a biological threat to national security. He was passed from department to department, put on hold, transferred to voicemail. No one took him seriously. No one wanted to hear about walking legs and hollow people and creatures that wore faces like masks. He tried a different approach. He contacted conspiracy websites, paranormal forums, alternative news outlets. Here, he found more receptive ears. People who believed, who wanted to believe, who had been waiting for proof of the things they suspected lurked in the shadows. He uploaded scanned copies of the Project Stiltwalk documents, sent links to the Nightcrawler footage, told his story again and again. The response was explosive. The documents went viral, shared across platforms, analyzed and debated by thousands of people. The footage, the original footage, not the compressed, degraded versions that had circulated for years, was studied frame by frame, the creatures' movements analyzed, their biology speculated upon. But the mainstream media remained silent. The government issued no statements, And in the comments sections of the forums, Samuel began to see patterns that chilled his blood. Users who agreed too quickly, who accepted the story without question, who urged others to spread the word and wake up. Their writing styles were similar, their phrasing repetitive, their profile pictures all variations on the same theme. People walking, legs in motion, the human gait captured in still images. They were learning to use the internet, learning to spread their message, their influence, their way of seeing the world. The creatures or things working for them were already among the online community, already learning to imitate human communication, human concern, human outrage. Samuel stopped posting, stopped calling. He gathered the original documents, the original tape, and went into hiding. A different motel every night, paid in cash, no pattern to his movements, no routine that could be learned and copied. A week passed, then two. He heard nothing from Lena, no message, no remember the diner, just silence stretching out like the darkness between stars. He began to assume the worst. Then on the 15th day his phone rang, an unknown number. He answered, his heart pounding. Samuel, Lena's voice, or a voice that sounded like Lena's. Lena, where are you? Are you okay? I'm fine, I'm in San Francisco. I've found someone who believes us. A senator. She's willing to hold hearings to investigate Project Stiltwalk to expose the truth. Samuel's relief was so intense it made him dizzy. That's incredible. When are the hearings? Next week in Washington. I need you to come, Samuel. I need you to testify, to show them the tape, the documents, to tell them what you saw. I'll be there. I'll book a flight tonight. Good, a pause, and Samuel, remember the diner. The line went dead. Samuel sat on the edge of the motel bed, the phone still in his hand, replaying the conversation in his mind. Remember the diner, the code, the proof that she was still herself, still human, still real. But something was wrong. The phrase had been rushed, almost an afterthought, and her voice had been slightly off. The cadence wrong, the emphasis on the wrong syllables. Or was he imagining it? Was his paranoia, his fear, making him hear things that weren't there? He didn't know, couldn't know. Not until he saw her in person, looked into her eyes, determined for himself whether the woman before him was Lena Vasquez or something wearing her face. He booked a flight to Washington, D.C., leaving the next morning. He spent the night packing his evidence, his documents, his tape, preparing for the most important presentation of his life. If he could convince the Senate, convince the government, convince the world, they might have a chance to stop this before it was too late. He arrived at LAX 3 hours early, paranoid about missing his flight, about being followed, about the 1,000 things that could go wrong. The airport was crowded, chaotic, thousands of people moving in patterns that the creatures would find easy to learn, easy to copy. He kept his head down, his eyes on his phone, trying to blend in. He passed through security, found his gate, sat in a corner where he could watch the entrance, the other passengers, any threat that might approach. And he saw her. Lena, or something that looked like Lena, standing at the gate, scanning the crowd, her eyes passing over him without recognition. She looked the same hair, same clothes, same posture, but her movement was wrong. The way she turned her head, too smooth, too mechanical. The way she shifted her weight, favoring her left leg in a way that Lena never had. Samuel's blood ran cold. The limp. They'd copied his limp, added it to their version of Lena, making her more convincing, more human-seeming. But they'd overplayed their hand. They'd made her too much like him, not enough like herself. He stood, moving away from the gate, toward the exit. The Lena thing saw him, its eyes locking onto his with terrible focus, and began to move through the crowd, following with that wrong, gliding gait. Samuel ran. Through the terminal, past the security checkpoint, out into the LA traffic. He didn't look back, didn't need to look back to know that it was following, learning his escape patterns, copying his panic. He found a taxi, jumped in, gave the driver an address at random. As they pulled away from the curb, he saw the Lena thing emerge from the terminal, standing on the sidewalk, watching him go. Its face was changing, the features shifting, becoming more Samuel-like with every passing second. They were replacing him, replacing her, replacing everyone who knew the truth, who could warn the world, who could stop them. He had to get to Washington, had to find the real Lena if she still existed, if she hadn't already been hollowed out and worn like a suit, had to testify, to show the evidence to make them believe. But first, he had to survive. Chapter 6: The Testimony. Samuel didn't fly to Washington. He drove, taking back roads, changing vehicles 3 times, paying cash for used cars that he abandoned when he felt they might have been tracked. It took him 5 days. 5 days of sleeping in rest stops, of eating gas station food, of watching his rearview mirror for pale shapes that walked with his gait. He reached Washington on the day of the hearings. The Senate office building was a maze of marble and security checkpoints, but Samuel had prepared, had forged credentials, had studied the layout until he could navigate it blindfolded. He found the hearing room, slipped inside, took a seat in the back row. The room was packed. Senators at the long table, staffers in the wings, press in the gallery, and at the witness table, Lena Vasquez. She looked tired, worn, but alive, human. She moved like herself, talked like herself, gestured like herself. No limp, no wrongness, just Lena telling her story to a room full of skeptical faces. And that's when we realized, she was saying, that these creatures aren't just animals. They're not just escaped experiments. They're intelligent, they're organized, and they're replacing us. A senator, an elderly woman from the Midwest, her face a mask of professional concern, leaned forward. Ms. Vasquez, these are extraordinary claims. Do you have any proof, any evidence beyond these, documents that could have been forged? I have witnesses, Lena said. Dr. Samuel Chen, the forensic analyst who found the original footage, who uncovered Project Stiltwalk, who can verify everything I've said. And where is Dr. Chen? He should be here. Lena scanned the crowd, her eyes finding Samuel in the back row. Her face lit up with relief, with recognition, with something that looked like hope. There, that's him. Dr. Chen, please come forward. Samuel stood, moving toward the witness table, his legs shaking, his heart pounding. He reached the front, took the seat beside Lena, felt her hand find his under the table, squeezing with desperate strength. You're real, he whispered. I am, she whispered back. But they're here in the room, I can feel them watching. We need to show them the tape, Samuel said. Now, before it's too late. He pulled the VHS tape from his bag, the original, the source, the proof that had started everything. A technician came forward, took it, inserted it into a player connected to the room's projection system. The lights dimmed, the screen flickered, and the footage played. The same footage Samuel had watched in his basement months ago. The Fresno lawn, the night vision green, the 2 pale figures gliding across the grass with their impossible, fluid grace. But something was different. The footage had changed. The figures weren't just walking now. They were looking at the camera, directly at it. And their faces, the faces that shouldn't exist, that were just suggestions of features stretched across invisible frameworks, were smiling. The footage cut, static filled the screen, and then a new image appeared. The hearing room, filmed from the back from the perspective of someone standing in the gallery, the senators at their table, Lena and Samuel at the witness table, and among the crowd dozens of pale shapes standing motionless, watching. The creatures were here, in the room, right now. Samuel spun around, looking at the gallery. The people there, the press, the observers, the curious, were normal, human, nothing wrong with them. But on the screen, the image showed the truth. Pale figures among them, hidden, watching, learning. It's a trick, one of the senators said, her voice shaking. Some kind of projection, special effects. "It's not," Lena said, standing up. "Look at yourselves, look at your neighbors, really look." The room erupted in chaos. People standing, shouting, pointing at each other, accusations flying, paranoia taking hold, and in the midst of it Samuel saw them, the real them, the creatures that had been hiding in plain sight. They were moving now, revealing themselves, their pale forms pushing through the crowd with terrible purpose. They converged on the witness table, on Samuel and Lena, their leg-like forms moving with that wet, sliding sound that Samuel had learned to fear. "Run!" he shouted, grabbing Lena's hand. They ran, through the chaos, through the screaming crowd, toward the emergency exit. Behind them the creatures followed, their numbers growing, more and more of them emerging from the crowd, from the shadows, from the places where they'd been hiding, learning, waiting. They burst through the exit, into a hallway, then another, then out into the Washington streets. The city sprawled around them, oblivious to the horror unfolding in the Senate building, the invasion that had been happening for decades finally revealing itself. "We need to get to a news station," Lena gasped as they ran. "Live broadcast, show the world what's happening." "They'll be watching," Samuel said. "They'll be everywhere." "Then we go somewhere they can't follow, somewhere they can't learn." "Where?" Lena stopped, turning to face him, her eyes wild with desperate inspiration. "The water. They came from water, they need it. If we can trap them, drown them, destroy their connection to it." "The Potomac," Samuel said, understanding. "We lead them to the river. We use the audio, the tape. We play it over the water, disorient them, push them in." "It's insane." "It's all we have." They ran for the river, the creatures following, their numbers swelling with every block. People on the streets saw them, saw the pale shapes pursuing the two humans, and screamed, ran, called for help that wouldn't come in time. They reached the Potomac at the Georgetown waterfront, the river dark and swift in the afternoon light. Samuel had the tape, had a portable player he'd grabbed from the hearing room, had the desperate hope that sound could be a weapon. He started the player, cranking the volume to maximum. The sound of the night crawlers filled the air, the recording of their own movements played back at them, distorted and amplified. The effect was immediate. The pursuing creatures froze, their coordination faltering, their smooth movements becoming jerky and uncontrolled. They stumbled, fell, crashed into each other, the disorientation spreading through their ranks like a wave. "Push them," Lena screamed, grabbing the nearest creature, a pale form that wore the face of a young man, maybe a Senate staffer, maybe something that had replaced him. She shoved it toward the water and it fell, splashing into the river, thrashing, sinking. Samuel joined her, grabbing creatures, pushing them, kicking them toward the water. They were heavy, denser than they looked, their bodies filled with something that wasn't quite solid, wasn't quite liquid. But they fell, one by one, into the river, and the water took them, pulled them under, carried them away. But there were too many, dozens, hundreds, emerging from the city, from the buildings, from the shadows. The invasion wasn't just in the Senate, it was everywhere, had been everywhere for years, waiting for this moment. "It's not working," Samuel gasped, exhausted, his hands bleeding from where the creature's rough skin had torn his palms. "There's too many." "Then we swim," Lena said. "We swim to the other side, get to Virginia, keep running, keep fighting." They jumped, hitting the water together, the cold shocking their systems. They swam, the current carrying them downstream, away from the creatures on the shore, away from the city, away from the nightmare. But the creatures followed. Into the water, walking on the riverbed, their pale forms visible beneath the surface, reaching up with leg-like arms, grasping, pulling. Something caught Samuel's ankle. He kicked, thrashed, felt it release, but then another grabbed him, and another, and he was being pulled down into the darkness, the light fading above him, Lena's face disappearing as she was pulled under too. He fought, but they were too strong, too many, too adapted to this environment. They had him, had both of them, and they were pulling them toward the riverbed, toward the darkness, toward the hollow. Samuel's last thought, as the water filled his lungs and the darkness took him, was of the tape, of the footage, of the proof that had been his burden and his purpose. Someone would find it, someone would know, the truth would come out even if he didn't live to see it. The darkness was complete. Chapter 7, The Broadcast. The camera pans across a suburban backyard, the grass neatly trimmed, the hedges tidy, a swing set rusting gently in the corner. It's evening, the sun setting in shades of orange and purple, the kind of sunset that makes people stop and stare and feel at peace with the world. A reporter stands in the foreground, microphone in hand, professional smile fixed on her face. "This is where it ended," she says, her voice the practiced cadence of television journalism. "The home of Dr. Samuel Chen, the forensic analyst who exposed one of the most shocking government conspiracies in American history." The camera cuts to footage of the Senate hearing, chaotic and confused, people running, screaming. Then to documents, photographs, the Project Stiltwalk files. Then to the river, police boats searching the water, divers going under, coming up empty. Dr. Chen and journalist Lena Vasquez disappeared during the chaos, the reporter continues. Their bodies were never recovered, but their evidence, the original Nightcrawler footage, the Project Stiltwalk documents survived, and it changed everything. More footage, congressional hearings, military tribunals, scientists in hazmat suits examining captured creatures, the pale forms restrained, studied, dissected. The creatures were real. The threat was real. The world had learned finally to believe. The creatures, the night crawlers, as they came to be known, were contained, the reporter says. A specialized task force trained in audio disruption techniques developed from Dr. Chen's research hunted them down. The invasion was stopped. The threat was neutralized. The camera returns to the reporter in the backyard. She smiles, the smile of a professional delivering good news. But the legacy of Dr. Chen and Ms. Vasquez lives on. Their courage, their determination to expose the truth, saved countless lives. They are remembered as heroes, as the people who looked into the darkness and refused to look away. She turns, gesturing toward the house. This property is now a memorial, a museum dedicated to their memory and to the warning they gave us. Be vigilant, be aware. The darkness is always watching, always learning, always waiting for us to forget. The camera pans away from the reporter across the backyard toward the hedge that borders the property. The sun has set now, the sky darkening to purple, the first stars appearing. And in the shadow of the hedge, something moves. A pale shape, tall, thin, walking with a glide that is almost human, almost natural, but not quite. The camera doesn't focus on it. The cameraman doesn't see it. The reporter, turning back to face the lens, doesn't notice it passing behind her, moving toward the house, moving with purpose. "This is Sarah Chen," the reporter says, and her smile falters for just a moment, just a fraction of a second, as she feels something behind her, something watching, something learning her movements, her gait, her way of being human. "Reporting for." The screen cuts to static. When the picture returns, the reporter is still there, still smiling, but her shadow on the grass behind her is wrong. It moves independently, walking with a perfect, unnatural glide, while the reporter herself stands perfectly still. No one notices. The broadcast continues, the reporter finishing her segment, signing off, walking away with a gait that is almost her own, almost natural but not quite. The camera lingers on the empty backyard, the empty hedge, the empty shadows. Then it too cuts to black. In houses across the country, viewers turn off their televisions, shake their heads, comment on the dramatic ending. They don't notice their own shadows, stretching long in the evening light, moving with subtle wrongness, learning, copying, becoming. The invasion wasn't stopped. It was just beginning. and no one would know the difference. Until it was too late. Thank you for listening to tonight's stories. If you enjoyed them, please leave a like and subscribe.